Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville, which I'm now calling to order. I see we have no regrets this evening, and the clerk and I would like to hear any declarations of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, I would ask for a mover and seconder for resolving into Committee of the Whole. Councillor Hutchins and Councillor Duddock, all in favor, and that carries, and we are now in the relaxed format known as Committee of the Whole. Council, we have I would say 6 consent items here, and we have public hearing items with many a delegation registered and apparently some volunteers as well. So I would ask, it's moved by Councillor Elgar, that the consent items be adopted. That's consent items 1, 2, 3, and 4, and C1 and C2. C2 is the late-breaking blue sheet on your paper. Is everybody okay with that? All right, shall I put the vote? All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. The consent items are adopted, including C2, the walk-on. Councillor Elgar. With no second because it's Committee of the Whole. Now, that brings us to our first public hearing item, and that is the public meeting report for the zoning bylaw amendment, IMH Queens at 297 Queens Avenue. This is not a decision-making item for council or a decision-making meeting on this item. Everyone needs to understand. This is a public comment registering or communicating to staff meeting on this item. And under the new rules, which I'm proud to say our town had a lot to do with achieving in terms of planning, specifically with regard to the Ontario Municipal Board, it's become more important than ever that the reasons that people have for and against things be specified. And so tonight we'll be taking extra pains to do that so that we can continue to have a good record whenever we show up at that place. So I'll just ask you, ma'am, if you want to be in the meeting, you can't disrupt it. So you need to think about why you're here. And we're doing public hearing item on Queen Street. We're not here for what you're trying to interrupt the meeting with, and I won't tolerate interruptions from you on that. I hope you understand what I'm telling you, because if you can't play nice, you'll have to leave. Understood? If you can't follow the rules of the meeting, you can't be here. I hope I'm clear. I will expel you if you do not. Thank you for your acknowledgement. That's important to have. All right, if we give our attention to Jeff Abma, he is going to reprise for the benefit of the public, many of whom are here, what the staff have heard so far on this application. And we have registered delegations from several people, and we will also take delegations from those who didn't register but may be moved by what they hear to offer their opinion. Mr. Abma, we are now all ears.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Tonight's report can be found on page 159 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of this report is to introduce a planning application for 297 Queens Avenue in conjunction with the required statutory public meeting. As noted in my report, there are no decisions to be made at this time, and the report is to be received by council. The property is located west of Trafalgar Road on the north side of Queens Avenue, just across the street here from Town Hall. The site comprises an area of 0.86 hectares with 80 meters of frontage on Queens Avenue and 64 meters of frontage on Trafalgar Road. A 10-story residential rental apartment building currently exists on the site. Surrounding the site, we have Queens Avenue Retirement Residence to the south, which is a 6-story apartment building for seniors. Beside that, we have a number of ground-oriented townhouse dwellings. Directly to the west of the subject site and north of Queens Avenue, we have a 7-story apartment condominium building. And to the north, we have the Region of Halton Reservoir site and a small open space ravine that immediately abuts Trafalgar Road just to the north. The applicant is looking to build an additional 10-story residential rental apartment building on the site. The new building is proposed to contain 159 rental units that will contain a mixture of 1- and 2-bedroom apartments. The existing building on site has 99 units. So together, both buildings would provide 258 units on the site with an overall density of 300 units per site hectare. The concept proposes a separate new driveway access off of Queens Avenue, separate from the driveway that accesses the existing building. And while both buildings would be located on a single property, the design is for them to essentially function as two separate sites. This is a rendering that was recently provided by the applicant depicting the proposal as viewed from Queens Avenue. The new building will have a 10-story portion that you can see in the background and a 6-story portion in the foreground with 2 levels of underground parking. In the surface lot, only visitor parking is proposed, and the remainder of the parking for residential units will be in the underground structure. This rendering also shows the driveway and the drop-off area, and the entrance to the 2 levels of underground parking is in the back in the 2-story portion on the left-hand side of the image. The units at grade, along in the bottom of the 6-story portion, will have small patio amenity areas that front onto the drop-off area. This rendering shows the building as viewed from Trafalgar Road. You can see the existing building depicted in the background on the left-hand side of the image. Another main entrance to the building is to be located along Trafalgar Road to serve pedestrian traffic traveling from places like the Oakville GO station across the QEW to the south, or possibly Sheridan College a little ways up the road to the north. This is quite a highly traveled pedestrian route. The first level of underground parking will be lined with residential units along the front of the building that you can see here. These 2-story units will also have small patio amenity spaces that can be accessed directly from each of the units. The applicant has submitted a zoning bylaw amendment application for this building. The existing zoning on the site is RH Residential High. The application is proposing to keep the RH zone and add a few site-specific provisions that you can see above here. And these include a reduced setback from Trafalgar Road of 3.23 meters, whereas 7.5 meters is currently required. A reduced setback from Queens Avenue of 3.08 meters, where 3.5 meters is currently required. A reduced setback from the reservoir site to the north of 0 meters, essentially for the parking structure, whereas 4.5 meters is currently required. Minimum landscaping coverage requirement of 5%, whereas 10% is required. And minimum total vehicle parking, including visitor spaces, of 174 total spaces, whereas 189 spaces is currently required. And lastly, the application requests a reduction in the width of a Type A barrier-free parking space from a width of 3.65, which is the current standard, to 3.4 meters. One of the first remarks I often hear about this file is, how is this going to work to have another building on the site? And when the application came in, we knew that visualizing this development would be very important in terms of understanding it. So I took the 3D massing model provided by the applicant and inserted it into a basic context model to help visualize how the development might work. The results is what you are seeing right now. If you're at the public information meeting on January 24th, you may remember this video, and it has subsequently been posted on the town's website. It has been a great exercise for me in understanding the proposal, and I hope it helps others as well. And now at this time, I think there's something that's it's really important to be clear about something with this application. The existing zoning on the site allows an additional 10-story building to be built on site. That is, the RH zone, without the modifications proposed here, already permit an additional building up to the height of the existing building on site. So what this means is that council is not being asked to consider whether or not a new building can or should be built on site, because the existing zoning provisions already allow it as of right. What council is being asked to consider through this application are the requested site-specific zoning provisions that I mentioned earlier related to the design of this building. Just to frame this in another way, the landowner currently has the ability to submit a site plan application along with the requisite supporting studies for a 10-story building that meets the existing zoning on the property as an as-of-right building. This would not require a zoning bylaw amendment. So essentially, the zoning bylaw amendment only relates to building setbacks, parking requirements, and landscape requirements. Looking at this from a policy perspective, the lands are designated high-density residential in the livable Oakville official plan, which permits residential apartment buildings. The lands are also part of a special policy area along Trafalgar Road, which permits transit supportive intensification up to 300 units per site hectare, which is the density that this development plus the existing building on the site would produce. Additionally, the area along Trafalgar Road is considered a growth corridor within the town's urban structure, which, as you know, is an emerging policy that has been approved by council and is waiting for approval at the regional level. The urban structure identifies a system of nodes and corridors as the framework to accommodate growth in Oakville. Within the regional official plan, Trafalgar Road is identified as a higher order transit corridor and an intensification corridor. And the regional official plan specifies that intensification corridors are intended to achieve higher densities than surrounding areas. Similarly, with respect to the growth plan emphasizes an intensification-first approach to development in order to make better use of existing infrastructure, such as transit corridors, and in a fashion to support transit viability. Keep this going for a little bit. The site's location along Trafalgar Road, within a transit corridor and within walking distance of the Oakville GO station, make it a good location for intensification to support transit. This application is currently under review by staff and technical agencies. Staff will be paying particular attention to the requested site-specific provisions in order to determine their appropriateness and whether they maintain and protect the existing character of the neighborhood. With respect to the requested reduced setbacks, staff note that they are being requested along property lines that do not abut a property with existing residential development that may be impacted. And in fact, a reduction to the front setback along Trafalgar Road may even be conducive to ensuring there's enough separation space between the proposed building and the existing building on site. With respect to traffic, the applicant has submitted a traffic impact assessment. It is currently under review by our technical staff. It does indicate, though, that the traffic to be generated by this development can be accommodated within the existing road network in the area. Similarly, the applicant has submitted a parking justification study in support of their revised parking requirements request. Again, the study is still under review by our technical staff. It indicates that the parking proposed for the development is sufficient based on an assessment of how parking is performed on the existing building on site, as well as other considerations. With respect to the reduced landscape coverage requirement, staff have pointed out to the applicant that the zoning bylaw does allow landscaping provided on the roof of a building to be counted towards the minimum requirement. Staff are hoping that a design change on part of the applicant will eliminate the need for this requested landscaping provision. With respect to the reduced size of a barrier-free parking space, staff have requested that the applicant revise their proposal to meet the current standards and that staff would not be supportive of any change to these standards. Again, here are the matters that staff will be considering in the review of the application, many of which I've just touched on. Any comments received tonight and received in the written correspondence that we have and will receive will be considered and included in the forthcoming recommendation report at a future Planning and Development Council meeting. In conclusion, staff recommend that comments provided tonight be received. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking down the 3D flight. I was getting dizzy.
Sorry about that.
All right, Council, do you have questions before we go to delegations? We have questions, a forest of questions. Let's start at the far end. Councillor Adams, was your hand up? Councillor Grant, was your hand up?
It was indeed.
Well, away you go.
Thank you very much. Along with, I'll just make a blanket statement about my usual concerns about reductions of parking. It's a very difficult thing when we reduce parking because then suddenly it becomes on-street parking, and that's nothing anybody wants to see. Looking at their transportation impact assessment, I realize that they're talking about how things exist now, but we are looking at up on Sewell, I believe, a few townhomes going up. There is discussion about another building going up on McCraney Street. That small section of McCraney is going to be really, really busy, and I'm hoping that when staff reviews the traffic assessment, they're going to be looking at the future, just not the way it is now, but they're going to be considering everything happening in that community. Because, again, it's an area that's had a lot of accidents in the past. It's a dangerous area, and as much as it is the only connector that that area is going to have to Trafalgar, it's going to be quite a hopping little place. So hopefully we can get some input on the future aspects. All right, thank you very much.
Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. A couple of questions. First of all, the nausea-inducing 3D animation, did that reflect the setbacks that are proposed? Because the first image you showed, it really looked like it was right on Trafalgar, and the second image showed further back. So is it just simply a matter of physics that that's the case, or was one reflecting the proposed setback and the other did not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The model that was created those were the setbacks that are being proposed. And having done that one, I put effort into ensuring that we reflected the requested setbacks. I cannot speak to the rendering. I wasn't involved in the preparation of that, but I would assume that the applicant made the effort to ensure that that reflected reality as well. But again,
It's
I
not
would
sure.
assume that it does reflect reality.
Okay. If we can maybe the applicant can confirm that when they come up, I guess. Slide 5?
Slide 5.
Okay. Second, what's slide 5? I'm sorry.
Slide 5 is where they'd shown,
Yeah, could you go to slide 5 for us for a second? Thank you.
because that looks right on top.
Yeah, I mean, it's if you look at that and compare it to the 3D animation, that literally is like a car width away or car length away from Trafalgar Road, 9 feet. So that leads to my next question. Good segue. I know that the commenting agency's portion of this enterprise comes in the next report. But have you had conversations, or anybody on staff had conversations with the region in terms of this setback issue? Informal ones, I guess they would be at this point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we have received comments from the region, and they have indicated that any road requirements that are identified in their Trafalgar Road detailed design would need to be conveyed to them at the time of site plan. My understanding in conversations with them is that they do not require any additional land beyond the current property lines. And I believe the applicant also confirmed that with the region through their discussions. So in terms of what they're proposing to be 3.23 meters off of that property line. And that is what the application has reflected in terms of what they are requesting.
Well, the proximity to the road is unfathomable to me. It's between two of the most dangerous intersections in Halton Region, and it's like 9 feet away, as Councillor Elgar said. That's surprising. In terms, I just want to echo something that Councillor Grant said, just because we've been talking a lot about this at Livable Oakville and here at Planning and Development, and that is this whole issue of visitor parking. They're requesting a reduction of 8 spaces in visitor parking. So I would, and also the reduction in unit parking for the actual tenants. I would, again, echo what we've been saying all along, that we need to be looking at that very, very carefully and not giving in on those issues. Those are all the questions I have for the moment. I look forward to delegations.
Councillor Lapworth?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Are we likely to see in the near future massive radio towers or Bell transmission towers on this building? And if so, how would that impact the health and welfare of town staff across the street?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware of any proposals to do that. And there are guidelines in place that would govern the installment of those on the building. And I don't have any further information for you about that currently.
Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Worship. And to avoid the rotating building, I think slide 6 or slide 7 has a picture of just a point of clarification. I'm hoping to take a look if you can up a slide. One more.
Back. This one here?
Sorry, no. I want to say slide 7. What's in behind?
Okay.
Yes, actually, you know what? So there it is right there. So that's in behind. That's the turnaround. And where do they go down into the underground parking?
They would enter into a garage door at this location.
Okay.
to drive in, and then there'd be a ramp down.
In the little 3D tour, it just looked
Yep.
like it was one big concrete slab back there, and I just wanted to make that
Yeah.
clarification. That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. Just two questions for you. One, you gave us a wonderful flyby, which made everyone dizzy, as everyone said. And honestly, it was great. I appreciate seeing it. I also appreciate the photos that you've got here. There were the design photos. Are there design photos of an as-of-right version that could be built without the amendments being requested?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, I do not have any of those.
And if we wanted to know what would be possible under the current situation, is it possible to receive something that would block out what in theory could be built without the amendments?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I believe staff could craft a basic massing model. It wouldn't be to this level of detail, but we could certainly do some calculations and determine what it may look like if it were, if it was within the existing zoning parameters.
I accept that there's architectural detail that's on some of these slides that they might be embellishments, and we have many times over the years said that we get these pictures and they've got great trees and great landscaping, and the thing that actually shows up never looks like that. But the building facade, I accept, might look something like this. But I'm really trying to understand what's the massing that would be as of right. Where might it show up if you didn't have this amendment? How different would it be? The other question I have for you is, it's been talked about the traffic issue. The traffic at Trafalgar and McCraney, that's one location. The traffic at the other corner, both of them are going to be impacted not only by this development, but the other developments that are in the area. The ward councillors have already alluded to another location that's in process, I guess, right now. But there's a development design for Trafalgar Road. The detailed design is underway right now. Have we received traffic studies that relate to those two intersections? The one at McCraney particularly, and the one at Iroquois Shore? And I'm thinking about right-hand turns going south down Trafalgar Road, for example, and left-hand turns going heading west off of Trafalgar.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm going to potentially turn to my colleagues in transportation, and they might be able to better answer that question for you, if I may.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the applicant's traffic impact study did look at the intersection of Trafalgar and McCraney, and then intersections to the north of that. It did not go south to Iroquois Shore.
And did they assume the changes that are being designed by the region right now, or is it as of right now?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the future traffic analysis was based on 2022 conditions, which does assume that the improvements to Trafalgar Road would be in place.
Okay, and are they satisfactory? Are there issues that need to be reviewed, or do you have comments yet?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, as Mr. Abma's noted, we're still reviewing the application.
Councillor Knoll. I'm sorry, Councillor Lischina for the first time. Councillor Knoll, we'll come back to you for a second.
Thank you, Your Worship. You made a comment about the landscaping on top of the roof that would count towards that 10%. Would that mean then it would be accessible to the public or the residents of the building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe by the definition provided in the zoning bylaw that it would automatically be required to be accessible. It would just meet the definition of landscaping, which could be
So it would just be a tree
vegetation.
somewhere in the corner of a building?
It could be vegetation, it could be grasses, it could just be a collection of landscaping that could be looked down upon from the upper stories on any portion of the roof, but it can also mean amenity space that includes that landscaping as well. So it doesn't.
So that wasn't specified to see whether that could be amenity space or just a bunch of greenery?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we can continue to have that discussion with the applicant as we move forward with this. and see what they determine to be something that would work for them as well. But in terms of what we pointed out to them in the zoning bylaw, that to have it accessible by residents isn't necessarily a requirement, but it could certainly be an area that would be included if it included landscaping.
Councillor Elgar, I take it that that satisfied your question? Then Councillor Knoll, you're up for a second time.
Thank you, Worship. Actually, Councillor Chinna's question, and I guess Councillor Elgar's question was my number one question, but my number two relates to what the line of questioning that Councillor Elgar, he's Adams, you're Elgar, that Councillor Adams had a second ago with respect to what could potentially be there. Now, to clarify, you made it very clear in your report and to the audience that there is an as of right to build a building of a similar number of units, similar height, et cetera. So my question then is how much, can you identify a percentage of how much less the massing would be in terms of the built form if we were to hold them to as of right? You talked about the size of the units at 75 meters squared or less, but what about the massing of the building itself? Do you have a sense of that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'll just show you, if I can get this to work here a sec. We'll go back to the site plan, and if you can see there's a dashed line
Yep.
on this. This represents the existing residential high zone setback. So the massing would need to be included in that, within that dashed line. In terms of the size of the massing, that again is all dependent, like you mentioned, on the size of the units and whether the existing parking requirements could be met through the design of a building. In terms of whether you could get the number of parking spaces for that number of smaller units within the property. Staff have not done gone down and actually crunched the numbers, hard and fast to say, yes, this is possible, because, it's a matter of design. But we feel that it is possible to potentially build one as of right, albeit with smaller units in order to meet the parking.
So as of right, again, clarifying, as of right at the same height, potentially the same number of units, but with potentially a greater massing on the site itself.
Now, through you, Mr. Mayor,
I
it
know,
could
I'm
have,
asking to
the
speculate,
massing
yeah.
could be the same, it could be less, it potentially could be more.
Yeah, I'm asking to speculate, and I apologize, but it would be interesting to get that information that Councillor Adams has requested.
All righty then. Maybe we should call the delegations. Madam Clerk, would you call the listed delegations?
The first listed delegation is Orinthia Marks.
Welcome, Ms. Mark. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I am a resident of Queens Avenue. I live at 1095 Queens Avenue. And we have been very concerned about this matter, and that's why I'm here as a resident. Some of the things that I've seen tonight gives me even more concern, and one of those is, as Councillor Knowles pointed out, the setback from the road. I'm just concerned about that, and in addition to that, some of the other things. If this were to begin now, within the next year, for example, nothing has been done to Trafalgar as yet, and we're already experiencing a great amount of difficulty getting in and out of our communities. So what would be done to allow us to move freely around as residents without being severely impacted on a daily basis with this construction?
Or do you have any other questions for staff? What we do is staff will collect all of these questions, and they'll answer them in their final report when they recommend refusal or approval, whatever they'll come up with.
Another concern is the infrastructure that is currently in place in this neighborhood of College Park. For example, I know that in the summer, when I'm out and about in my yard and all my neighbors are, I have a significant reduction in water pressure, for example. So what are some of the things that are going to be done to improve on these current concerns, considering that we have all these other proposals for McCraney, and I'm hearing about something that's being proposed for Leyland as well? What infrastructure will be put in place to improve what we're currently experiencing with this being added to it? The other thing is the viaduct that's below where this building is being proposed. I'm concerned about that, and the land as it looks in this 3D is completely different from what I know as a resident who walks by there all the time. I'm just very puzzled. It looks nothing as it is now, and it seems to me then that there must be a plan to do a massive amount of reconstruction along Queens Avenue and to adjust Trafalgar as well for that to happen. What plans would be in place to detour traffic? I'm just concerned about all of these kinds of things. It just seems like a huge not just inconvenience, but traffic congestion more than we have on Trafalgar right now. And danger to pedestrians. There was a Sheridan student that was just killed, run over by a car that ran down the hill on Trafalgar right at the same place where this building is being proposed. So it's a very dangerous area, and that's a part of my concern about what's happening there. The other thing is the access to the site. One of the big concerns, how are they going to access the construction site? Is this access going to be exactly in our neighborhood from Sewell into Park Hill and then onto Queens Avenue? The density of our area is a big concern. Queens Avenue is 600 meters long, and we have a vast amount of buildings. I would say vast, because for me, I think that's so much already. We have the one condominium on Queens Avenue west of this proposed site. There's one where they are, and there's a smaller one. Plus, there's a seniors residence right across from where this proposed site is at the moment. So we're maxed out, we believe, and we're very concerned about adding additional 159 units plus whatever is going to be on McCraney as well in this small area. And in addition to that, reduction of parking spots for this building would put more strain on our street, because at the moment, we're getting people who are parking illegally on our street who are visiting their existing building, people who are going to the seniors' residence because there's not enough parking there, and they're all parking for enormous lengths of time on Queens Avenue. And this, we believe, will also create another bit of problem with the parking. Just wondering also, what are some of the other considerations that this landowner could present as an option, a viable option to use their land rather than putting a 10-story building with another 159 units on Queens Avenue? Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Sue Heddle.
Welcome, Ms. Heddle. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening. I moved to Queens Avenue because Queens is a lovely street that already has density. When we talk about community, I like to think of Queens Avenue as being ideal in the way that we have apartment buildings, we have townhouses, we have condos, and we have single-family dwellings. So it's a very well thought out and densely populated area as it is. I'm a little upset because my understanding was that this land was still up for a discussion about putting on another 10-story building there. Queens, like Orinthia mentioned, is only 600 meters long, and it's right across the street. I don't know if everyone knows, but you can just drive down the street and it's right here. And if you just want to take a drive down, you'll see that there's a 10-story building, and I believe you mentioned it has 99 units. Well, when they bought that building, Starlight bought that building, they actually tore out what was there. It was family dwellings. They had 2 and 3 bedrooms and single bedrooms, and they turned them all into 1-bedroom home apartments. So basically student residents. And I know that We do need residents for students, but it also comes with, my concern is that those people who are transient are not invested in our community the way we are. And if they're going to put in a building, and if it's a done deal, I would like to see it be more than just one-bedroom units. I don't know if we can adapt to that. But, so that one that you says 99 is actually, they tore them out, is now 105 units there, 105 one-bedroom units. Then there's a 10-story building on the end. Like, nowhere else can you drive in this community in Oakville, and all of a sudden, boom, in the middle of residential street pops up an apartment building. So there's 97 units there. They've been there since 1963. There's the 6-story retirement home, which is right across from this proposal that will negatively impact the seniors trying to get in and out, also the ambulances that are trying to get in and out of that area. There's a 7-story condo building, which is 34 units, and that building's actually mostly housed by seniors as well. They kind of piggyback onto the services that are offered across the street at the retirement home. There's 35 townhouses in one section, and then the other section has 24 towns. There are 29 detached houses, and then there's a little court in there on Mason Court, and there's 8 houses in there. So my question, infrastructure. I'm going to briefly touch on it, but that is a reservoir. That's where they're proposing to build it. It's a reservoir, and it's older infrastructure. So if you're going to put that much concrete on there, where's that water going to go? So I don't know about the next 100-year storm, because it seems that we have more and more of these microstorms all the time. We have to think about where that water is going to go. Right now, the grass is there to absorb some of that water, and that reservoir is there, and that's where they want to put the building. So where are they going to store that water? How is it going to be released into the system, the existing system? Is that infrastructure able to contain that, or does it have to be improved? And should the builder be asked to improve upon that system before they put the building in? The other thing that drives me crazy is that Starlight, they don't even have any bike racks. So we've got bicycles that are kind of littered around the street. Some are abandoned. They're attached to different poles and on fences and on trees. If you're going to put in something that the elephant in the room is, this is student housing, put in bike racks. Can we have, in this beautiful 3D rendering, could we have some lovely bike racks where people can actually put their bikes and not throw them on the street? The other thing is bike to street. Now, we have, since they've taken over, they've put in the 1-bedroom units, and now we have a lot of bed sheets in the windows. We have blankets and stuff. Can the building adopt maybe white to street, so we have some sort of, well, it looks pleasant when you walk by instead of seeing all these bed sheets and different things hanging in the windows? If they could adopt that, if it's a done deal. And also, I'm concerned about this traffic model. Okay, so they talk about traffic plan, but we don't know what model they actually used for this traffic plan. And right now, there's a redevelopment of the mall. And once the mall is getting more and more attention, all these turns are left turns, left turns, left turns. There's only one left turn lane into the mall. So when you're going up the street, everything stops because people are trying to get over into the left turn lane. There is a sign that says, and perhaps the mall should pay for it and put up a better sign directing people that there is a right turn away access into the mall. And the other question is, basically my concerns are the reservoir, waters, and the planning for flooding, and the impact of the seniors' residents. So if they're going to access it, I know they propose to access it. If we look at slide number 3, can we see that? Mm-hmm. So they're going to access it from Trafalgar, I believe, behind the proposal, and that, in that top corner there, that would impact the traffic that's all going north at rush hour. And if you look beside the proposed building immediately to the right, that's the reservoir I'm talking about, that big patch there of white in that kind of rectangle square. So if the town council could please look at those two things and let us know, let the residents know what the plan is for the water. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The staff are required to deal with all the issues that we raise here.
Okay, thanks.
Madam Clerk, Councillor Knoll. Ms. Heddle, I wonder if you'd be kind enough to take a few questions from your councillors.
Just one. So one of the applicant's requests here is to reduce the parking standard for this building beyond or under what we would typically require. We heard from the previous delegation, your neighbor, that she had experienced parking issues on the street resulting from the buildings that are there right now. Can you explain your experience in that regard? I'm curious if you've experienced similar kind of parking challenges on your street.
Well, there's no overnight parking, thankfully, but yeah, the parking challenges, if anybody has a party, God forbid, there's absolutely no parking on the street. There's, honestly, why don't we have the bike rack thing? Like, why haven't they proposed a glorious, because a lot of I don't know how many cars are actually going to be there if it is student, like I think we're kind of all know that it's student housing. I think that the cars may not impact it as much as the disruption during construction, and there has to be access to that building for the seniors. And the parking's already stretched to the max, but I don't believe personally that there'll be a lot more Orinthia, because I think it's probably mostly students that'll be living there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Ms. Heddle. Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
The next delegation is Oz Kimmel from MHBC Planning.
Welcome, Mr. Kimmel. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor Burton, members of council. I'm joined today, my name is Oz Kamal, I'm with MHBC Planning. We're the planners on this file. I'm joined today by the architect, the traffic consultant, and as well as I'm joined by the client themselves, Starlight Development. We're all here because we are interested in hearing what the residents have to say to make sure that we can continue our dialogue with town staff, to make sure that our development proposed does address comments received and does address the town's comments and concerns. Our client, Starlight Development, is an asset manager, and they will be a long-term manager of this site. They are invested in Oakville, and they are here to listen to the comments received tonight. With respect to, this isn't as good as Mr. Abba's PowerPoint, but I just wanted to put the site plan out. I know some of the comments we've heard tonight related to traffic and infrastructure and servicing. Those reports are under review right now, and we're waiting to hear back on comments so that we can make sure that those comments, in addition to the residents' comments, are properly addressed. One thing I do want to point out, bicycle parking, as Ms. Heddle had pointed out, we are proposing 160 bicycle parking spaces on this site. We do recognize the fact that, as she does, that there is a large student population, and as such, there should be bicycle parking, so we are proposing that. As Mr. Abma had pointed out, the proposal is to add a second 10-story building. A portion of it is 6 stories with 159 units. There is also some townhouse units, all rental, facing Trafalgar, which was a request by Urban Design to address Trafalgar Road. There is currently, and again, as discussed, a 10-story building with about 100 rental units. The intent of the building is to function with the existing building with shared outdoor amenities between the two buildings. The existing zoning on the site permits the second apartment building. The reason for the site-specific amendment is to make adjustments to the setbacks, landscaping, and parking provisions of the zoning bylaw. As noted in the staff report, a planning information meeting was held on January 24th. Some of the comments that were heard at that time included traffic, and has been heard tonight. The general comments that we had heard was that the preference was to not have traffic flow through the existing neighborhood, but rather have traffic exit from the site to Trafalgar Road. Unfortunately, the region won't permit us such an access, as they limit the access to their regional roads, so access has to use the existing road network. Traffic parking study has been submitted and is under review, and as pointed out by Mr. Abma, staff generally agree that the existing road network can incorporate the traffic flow anticipated from this development. There were some concerns noted with respect to the existing building and respect to maintenance. I'm glad residents are telling us this, because without the residents, we don't necessarily know that there's issues with maintenance. So our property managers are here, and we will ensure going forward that building maintenance is properly upheld. There's been some concerns over the loss of existing outdoor amenity area, as the proposed development will be situated where a pool exists today, an outdoor pool. Our client is proposing outdoor amenity spaces at levels 2 and level 3 just because of the way the grades work. This is level 2. This is level 3 with outdoor amenity space on both. Our client is also looking at opportunities to provide additional outdoor amenity space for the new building, which is intended to be shared with the existing building. They have also hired a pool consultant and is committed to reviewing the feasibility of providing a pool. So that consultant was recently retained, so we're going to be looking at whether it's feasible that we could incorporate a pool somewhere on the site. Again, as Mr. Abma pointed out, the site is still under review with the town. We appreciate residents' comments. We intend to provide a full resubmission promptly once we have the appropriate town comments, as well as from where it goes from tonight. So I'd be happy to answer any questions as I can.
Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for your delegation. A couple questions for you. So you've just acknowledged, I guess, what was going to be my first question. I was going to ask what the market is for this building. We've heard lots of concern that it's oriented towards students and lots of bicycles, and you've addressed the fact that you're going to have 160 bicycle spaces on the property, correct?
Correct.
And so is that essentially your client's plan, that it's going to be essentially student residences or student rentals?
It's not going to be exclusively marketed towards students. Right now, the current intended mix is to have approximately 100 one-bedroom units and about 43 two-bedroom units. And then there's also the two-story townhouses on the main floor, which would be multi-bedroom as well.
Second question is, with respect to the townhouse units, I didn't actually recognize those on the drawing. Will those townhouse units be accessing Trafalgar directly, or will they be accessing internal corridors?
For the most part, there's a grade differential on Trafalgar, which everybody knows, and it kind of climbs as you approach City Hall. The intent is that there will be access along Trafalgar where feasible. I think a couple of the units will have to access an internal corridor, though.
Okay. The 3D flyby that we saw, I asked the question, I think that your organization prepared the 3D flyby, correct?
The architect did.
The architect, so somebody within your group.
Sorry, yes.
Did that 3D flyby incorporate the proposed setbacks from Trafalgar?
My understanding was that it did, but after hearing your comments, we're going to go back and take a look at it to make sure, because I understand what you're saying, but my understanding was that it did.
If you look if you look at the flyby and you look at that the elevation, there looks to be a fairly big differential between the two of them.
Understood.
I think those are the questions I have for now. I think Councillor Grant will.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, and I'm glad that you've got a site supervisor with you today, because Ms. Heddle and a few people in the community have contacted me from time to time about garbage or bikes or broken furniture outside the building. And I'm hoping that perhaps we can solve another problem that was brought up this evening, and that's window coverings. Is there some way that we can get building management to supervise or enforce some kind of a rule that you can't just throw up a blanket or throw up a bed sheet to cover a window? Just to make it a little bit more, I realize that some of these people are probably not as invested in the community, but it's also a little bit of a matter of pride, I think, to have a nice home.
No, it definitely is, and I can attest to that as well. You know what, let us look at that. Let us see what we can figure out for that,
Okay.
talk with staff about that.
And also, I guess I'm a bit confused because a few months back when this was first discussed between myself and the developer, it was going to be marketed as a luxury apartment building, and now you've told us that it's going to be student housing.
No, sorry, I never said student. I said that it'll be a mix of units. So there will be some family units, there'll be some, I'm sure students will rent them.
Okay,
Yeah.
what would be the basic rent for a one bedroom?
Oh, I don't have that, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Can you tell us, you just went through the breakdown of the number of one-bedroom and two-bedroom, and I presume the townhouse formats are a three-bedroom format of some sort?
They're likely to be a two-bedroom format, I would guess.
Okay, thank you. And can you compare this breakdown to the breakdown of the existing building? How do the unit sizes compare? There was some discussion earlier about if you didn't have this particular zoning amendment, that the unit sizes would have to be smaller in order to accommodate the site. And so I'm trying to understand, how does this compare to what's already there in the other buildings around it?
In the existing building, the size of the units?
Well, the size of the units, are they one bedrooms, are they two bedrooms? Do you know what the breakdown is?
Not off the top of my head, and I don't have that with me, I'm sorry.
Okay. And do you have drawings of what you would do with the site without the zoning bylaw amendment?
No, but I did take the note, and I think that's something that we will look at.
Okay. In your rough estimation, would you just simply be trying to push the building, I'll say, to the left on this drawing, or would it require significant changes?
Now I'm speculating. It's hard. It's actually hard to say because it does contemplate a second 10-story building. We did a partial 10-story building and then a 6-story. I don't. We would have to play with it. I'm sure there's different ways to cut it, to cut the site, and I would have to look at it. There's a couple of factors to look at.
Thank you. And do you have? We were talking about student housing versus other housing. Do you have any understanding of what the demographics are in the other building?
I don't.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Hutchins, were you? Yes, Councillor Hutchins is next.
Thank you very much. I just want to clarify something. I may have misheard you. Did you say that the region doesn't allow access onto Trafalgar from your facility? So that's why you have to go through the back?
The region won't allow us vehicular access onto Trafalgar for this development.
What about the townhouses? Because what happens to that? Because I miss.
Sorry, the townhouses are incorporated into the existing building. They're in the apartment building. We're just what we did is we're calling they're a 2-floor townhouse in the building. So it's all within the building. So they're using the same access point, the same parking garage.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimmel.
Thank you.
Mr. Kimmel, actually, 1 second. You, as a registered professional, you're a registered professional planner?
I am, sir.
So it's your business to know that the town only recently completed a massive rewrite of its zoning bylaw called InZone?
I heard that, yes.
And so you had the chance to look at our zoning as you were preparing your application?
Yes.
I guess that's how you knew you wanted more than what our zoning offered, right? So were you at all concerned that your application was going to look like overdevelopment when it landed here in front of us?
No, because...
It never crossed your mind that you might risk looking like you were doing overdevelopment?
No, because the zoning bylaw implements the official plan, and the official plan allows you to have a certain density. And really, density is what caps whether it's overdevelopment or not. And in this instance, we're meeting that density provision.
Well, there's a little more to overdevelopment. There's setbacks, and there's landscaping, and there's amenity space, and there's parking, and all of these things are the ones that you're pushing the envelope on significantly, I would say. And so I'm surprised that you're maintaining that you never thought that anyone up here would look at this and think it looked like overdevelopment.
I didn't think that it would be considered overdevelopment. I thought.
Are you
that
getting
there
the
would be-
idea that it might be, that idea might be loose in the room?
I'm getting a feeling.
Thank you very much. You've been a delightful delegation. All right, Madam Clerk, the next delegation.
That is our last listed delegation.
Has anybody got anything new for council on this? I only ask it that way because there's a lot more and many more delegations to come on other items. I'm not, oh, Ms. Marks, you've had your go, so did you have something burning, something new? Come on. You were good the first time. Let's see if you're good the second time.
I made a grave omission. I meant to say, and Mayor, thank you very much, and Council, just wanted to let you know we have collected almost 200 signatures from residents in the Queens Avenue and College Park area, and we have others as well that are coming. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Giddings, Councilor Giddings.
Thank you. I'm just curious, 200 signatures in support of expressing concern over.
So we just went out, like, it's March break, so it's very quiet, but it was so easy. Nobody said yes to any of these proposed changes. Everyone signed the petition. And so we've got over 200 signatures. That's from us walking around. We also have a document on change.org. If you go to change.org and you go to Queens Avenue, you'll see that there's a petition posted there as well, and so people can sign online.
Would you be good enough to supply that?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
I
will.
got it right here.
We will be.
And we have a Facebook page, College Park My Home, and all the information's on there as well.
I'll send you a copy of the petition.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I'll email you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Councilor Grant.
Just quickly for the last delegation, if you could send information, you'd mentioned problems with water pressure. This is something I've never heard before. If you could send an email to myself and Councilor Knoll about that, that'd be great. Also, as you're getting your submissions and signed stuff, thank you, petition. I'm trying to talk really quickly here, that's the problem. Remind people, though, to write into town clerk, because that's really where it's going to matter most. The more people who talk to the town clerk or send their opinions to the town clerk ends up in the final document. Okay, thank you very much.
So, remember at the start of the meeting I mentioned that this is under the new planning rules the province brought in, partly in response to the agitation that Oakville had conducted. What the councilor's trying to make clear is that this new process, to be captured into the process, it's not good enough to be on change.org or on Facebook. It's got to be actually on the file here. And the planning process doesn't yet include change.org or Facebook. And based on some of the things I've heard about Facebook lately, I'm not sure we want to have government by Facebook. Any other members of council with any new questions for staff or concerns on the matter? All right, well, on your behalf and for myself, Mr. Abma, I would like staff to especially look at the question of whether or not this does in fact constitute overdevelopment, and for no good reason. Seems to me that they have the permission they need to do a perfectly viable development, and I'm missing any justification for the damage they want to do to setbacks and landscapes and amenities and parking and all the rest. So I'd like to see some planning thought devoted to analyzing how this isn't overdevelopment, given that it seems like it's unnecessary. Is this causing a problem? Well, I'll just move it then. Sorry. All right. We need a motion from one of the ward councillors, Councillor Knoll, that the comments from the public with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment application by IMH Queens Limited be received, and 2, that analysis of the following matters of interest to council be included as part of the recommendation report Where do I look for the list? Mr. Simeone.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, as you know, we're working through a new system this evening, so I've been diligently taking notes on matters that Council has expressed concern on, and I'm going to read into the record. I'll pass this to the clerk at the end. So we have the preamble that the analysis of the following matters of interest to Council be included as part of the recommendation report. So I have A, concerns with respect to reductions in parking. This must be further considered. Staff should consider future development, not just existing, when dealing with traffic issues. That's B. C, have the drawings reflected the reduced setback, which is C. D, confirm the region has consulted with respect to road needs and the proposed setbacks from Trafalgar Road. E, could as-of-right designs be developed for Council to consider to better understand massing? Consider traffic issues on Trafalgar resulting from the proposed development. Can the placement of amenity space as part of the green roof be considered? Can an estimate be provided to what percentage of massing the proposal provides versus the as-of-right permissions? And does this constitute overdevelopment? What is the justification given the impacts on things like parking, setbacks, et cetera?
Given all of the apparent impacts, and if you need my list, I'll write it off. Water, roads, parks, landscape, open space, setbacks. We didn't want. Water, roads, parks, landscape, open space, setbacks, amenity space, and parking. So there's, and I may have missed one or two. I was writing fast as I was listening to people. All right, so all of that, as read and understood, is moved by Councillor Knoll. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is adopted. And we will now move on to public meeting report number 6. This also is an information report and session rather than a decision session. And we have quite a few registered delegations, and this concerns Bellier Street. And for some reason, it features Oz Kemmel again. So I don't think he's going to be leaving yet. I didn't see where he went, though, but somewhere he's here. There he is. So if we give our attention now to Melissa Dalrymple, she will reprise for the public what this is all about. And I say it that way because Council's already read the file, and it's quite voluminous. And then I think you can tell from the last session that Council, from their questions, knew a lot about it. Ms. Dalrymple, we are all ears, and assuming that people won't leave by inches but quickly so as not to disrupt you, we'll plunge ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. As you've mentioned, this is the statutory public meeting for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Bellier Developments, Inc. to permit the development of 20 townhouse dwellings and 6 accessory dwelling units. The report can be found on page 189 of tonight's agenda. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain input from the public and council related to this application. No recommendation on the application is proposed tonight. And it's important to note that this application was deemed complete on January 11th, 2018, which was after Bill 139 received royal assent. The subject lands are located on the north side of Bellier Street, east of Nelson Street, within a parcel of land currently designated for medium-density residential development. The subject lands are 0.44 hectares in size and are occupied by a 2-story apartment building containing 6 rental dwelling units in this location. As well, there's a 1.5-story detached dwelling fronting Bellier, and this property here, 2311 Bellier Street, is currently vacant, but was previously occupied by a detached dwelling. The lands are designated medium-density residential in livable Oakville. The residential medium-density land use designation permits a range of housing types, including multiple attached dwelling units, apartments, retirement homes, and long-term care homes at a density range of 30 to 50 units per site hectare. Both the density and housing type proposed by the development application are permitted by livable Oakville, therefore no official plan amendment is required. The subject lands are zoned RM4, Special Provision 75, which does not permit townhouse dwellings. Therefore, the applicant proposes to rezone the lands to RM1 with a site-specific special provision. The site-specific special provision is to modify additional zoning regulations, including to allow balcony projections of 1.6 meters, to recognize the subject lands as one lot for the purposes of zoning interpretation, and to modify regulations related to accessory dwelling units, including to allow accessory dwelling units in a townhouse dwelling, and to allow a maximum of one accessory dwelling unit per townhouse dwelling, and also to allow some of the existing regulations for accessory dwelling units to apply to townhouses. This slide shows the proposed layout, which consists of 20 townhouse dwellings that are 3 stories in height, and these red dots denote the location of the 6 one-bedroom accessory rental units. The units all front onto a condominium road with one access point to Bellier. Parking for the townhouse units, accessory units, and visitor parking has been provided in accordance with the requirements of the current zoning bylaw. This slide shows the proposed building elevations, both fronting internally to the site and the side elevation or flankage elevation facing Bellier Street. A complete analysis of the application is underway, and this includes a review of the following information. Feedback from the public and council. A public information meeting was held on February 21st, 2018, and was attended by approximately 14 residents and both ward councillors. In addition, a number of written submissions have been received by the town. Feedback received from this meeting will also be considered and included in a future recommendation report. The technical review is also underway, and matters related to servicing, stormwater management, traffic, and tree preservation are all being reviewed as part of this technical review. Consistency with the provincial policy statement and conformity with the 2017 growth plan are also being evaluated by the town and regional staff. Regional staff are also reviewing conformity with the regional official plan, particularly with respect to policies related to protection of existing rental housing stock and whether the proposed accessory dwelling units represent a suitable substitute to the existing rental apartments. The town is also reviewing the application in context with our policies. In particular, they're being reviewed in the context of urban design policies and the character criteria in Livable Oakville and the urban design directions contained in the Livable by Design manual. To date, staff have identified 3 main areas that require further consideration by the applicant in order to ensure the proposed development meets the character criteria for development in stable residential communities and the urban design policies and directions contained in Livable Oakville and the Livable by Design manual. So staff, planning staff, and urban design staff's feedback can be grouped into 3 main themes, including the relationship with the streetscape, transition to the detached dwellings east of the site, and as well location of parking. So in terms of streetscape, both Livable Oakville and the Livable by Design manual contain policies and design directions encouraging that new development contribute to the creation of a cohesive streetscape by framing the street and placing principal building entrances towards the street. As you can see, as proposed, there are 2 units along the public street frontage, both flanking with their side elevations on the street. With this type of configuration, a large portion of the streetscape experience will be created by fencing for the rear yards, and also a view of the private road framed by driveways and garages. Staff feel that an alternative layout with built form facing the street and framing the street could address these issues and help reinforce the existing community character. In terms of the transition to the east, there is a detached dwelling currently existing in this location, and as proposed, the layout of the 3-story townhouse block in this location orients living spaces and balconies in close proximity to the side and rear yards of this adjacent detached dwelling to the east. The proposed grading and finished floor elevations submitted with the application demonstrate that these concerns will only be intensified with relation to building orientation and privacy. As proposed, some of the building would have finished floor elevations more than 1.5 meters higher than the surrounding grades, resulting in a built form that will give the appearance of a 3.5-story building. The height and orientation of the built form and its appropriate transition is very important when located adjacent to low-rise residential properties. Compatibility of the proposal with the adjacent existing detached dwellings to the east must be achieved. Again, in staff opinion, an alternate layout with built form facing and framing the street with flankage elevations oriented towards the detached dwelling to the east would go a long way at addressing these issues. In terms of location of parking, I'll point out to you that there are currently parking spaces in this location here and this location here, directly adjacent to Bellier Street. And we also have these extended driveways for the accessory dwelling units located in this area and this area. These are proposed to be signed for parking for small car parking only, given the fact that the turning maneuvers in this location are too tight for a normal or larger size car. So when we start to see visitor parking wedged into these undesirable locations, it starts to point to the fact that there's a lack of space on site to accommodate this required parking and that the site might be overbuilt. Certainly reducing the number of dwelling units on this site should be explored by the applicant. So just to reiterate, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain further public comment. In addition, given that this file falls under the reformed planning regime put in place by Bill 139, we do encourage members of council to provide input on the application. This feedback will be responded to in the staff recommendation report and will form part of the public record. In order to provide council the opportunity to make a decision within the 150-day time frame for zoning bylaw amendments identified by Bill 139, staff will be presenting a recommendation report at the Planning and Development Committee meeting of May 14th, 2018. To conclude, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for council's consideration.
Thank you very much. And Council, do you have questions for Melissa? Councilor O'Meara.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Melissa. I appreciate it. The initial pre-con, it said they came in with 18 townhomes, but then, am I correct that the actual application then increased to 20?
That's correct, through you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Do we know what the heights of these 3 stories in comparison to even what the rental property is to the west, or the rental properties in behind there? Do we know what the difference in height would be with the buildings adjacent to it on all sides, as a matter of fact?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, that analysis hasn't taken place yet. The proposal does provide for a building height that's 12 meters or under. They aren't requesting any additional building height.
Okay. If we could make sure that we understand, even though it's 12 meters, what the repercussions are for the heights of the other buildings, that would be fantastic. The numbers for the regional rental vacancy rate I see are from 2016. Do we have any idea when we will be getting the updated numbers from 2017?
That's something we can check back on.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. I too would just like to raise the point, as you have already, that we need to be considering the transition, the overbuild, and again, the streetscape. I think it's really important that it looks like Bellier and not too much. So thank you for that, Your Worship. Thank you.
Councillor, some of us had trouble hearing what you were asking about the numbers in the region. Could you just clarify that for us?
Sorry about that. So the regional rental numbers, which they put out on a yearly basis, the ones used in the report were from 2016, and I think it said that Oakville was at 1.6%, and our target is at 3%. So I just would like to know when we're expecting the 2017 numbers, and whether that's going to be higher or lower, or what the trend is going in the region at this point.
We'll try to get you that in July.
Perfect.
We'll put it on extra speed. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I want to ask staff a question that has not been part of this consideration to the best of my ability, or the best of my knowledge, I guess. But I'm going to ask you, has any of the people within the town's planning department have been asked to consider combining the Hickson Street sixplexes, there's 3 of them there, that are badly in need of a renovation, and the owner of the property is here this evening, hearing everything I'm saying. But I think it's time that we considered combining this particular application with the south side of Hickson Street and do something appropriate and better and clean up the entire area. Have you had any consultation about that up to this point?
To this point, through you, Mr. Mayor, we have not had any consultation on those other 6 plexes.
I'm not surprised, and I'm interested in hearing from the owner of the Hickson Street buildings, who's here this evening, if he has got any interest in proceeding in that direction.
This is a fishing trip.
Well, whatever you like to call it, sir.
It's an excellent piece of casting. We'll see what kind of fish you get. Thank you, Councillor. Are any other councillors with questions? Councillor O'Meara.
Worship, I just had one follow-up question. We did receive a letter from lawyers for the property owners on Friday, I believe, requesting that we not follow through on the Bill 139 deadline. And one of the elements they said is that they disagree with the fact that Bill 139 stated there is a 150-day timeline for council to make a decision. So I'm wondering if our staff may be able to just clarify, do we have 150 days under the new rules or do we not? Thank you.
Mr. Solicitor.
Yes, through you, Mayor Burton, the Bill 139 timeframe has increased by 30 days for zoning applications to 150 days. After 150 days has expired, if council has not made a decision on the application at that point, then an applicant is in a position to proceed to an appeal for a non-decision.
Councillor, what do you want to do with that?
I'm just happy we get the clarification from our lawyer, because it seems 2 lawyers can say 2 different things, and I always appreciate hearing from our lawyer. Thank you.
Alrighty then. Before I go to delegations, planning staff, on the question of height, I'm interested to have planning apply their minds to how the notion of an as of right 12 meters in the zoning may or may not be impacted by the policies that we have, I think, in section 11.1.9, where we talk about compatibility. So your learned minds can perhaps help us on that side, and that may be of assistance also to the councillor's questions, if I understand which direction he was going on that. Madam Clerk, would you like to call the first of our mini delegations?
The first delegation speaking to this item is Karen Moore.
Ms. Moore? Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and the councilors, for your time this evening. I also want to thank Bellier Developments and the Guston family for partnering up and putting this application in to hopefully improve our community. I think the feeling as a neighborhood is that we are worried that more sixplexes are going to go in across the street from our homes, like the one that Councillor Robinson was talking about. It's not pretty around that area. It looks terrible. And the fact that the Guston family owns half of the property across from me, it worries me that he's going to build more of what he owns now. So we as a community on the street, we want the townhouses. So we are asking you to pass the application that has been brought forward from the builder, because we do not want more sixplexes going in. Of course, our preferences would be for less than 20 units. We feel that 20 units is too much. We also have a concern with the frontage and how it will fit into our community. We do trust that the builder and the town will work together with respect to all zoning and bylaws that are in place. I have heard good things about the builder, and I'm hoping that he will build superior townhouses and not just overbuild for the sake of just throwing anything up. I do look forward to seeing what the builder will be building across the street. I have read through the report from the Planning Services Department, and I am satisfied that the town has heard all of our concerns, and I feel that they do stand with us. We do expect a high standard of urban design, and consequently, I do ask again of council to please accept the application of rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your information. Madam Clerk, Councillor Duddick?
Thank you.
Councillor Duddick has a question for Ms. Moore.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Who were you saying you were representing, or are you just...
I'm representing the neighborhood, and the reason I want the application to be passed is because I have a fear that sixplexes are going to be put across the street if this application isn't accepted.
Okay, I guess my concern is from the privacy standpoint, or lack of privacy, for the people directly abutting the property, and the increase in height and how that would affect somebody who's directly abutting it. That's why my question was, are you representing them as well, and are they in support?
Well, I think we have two options. We either have townhouses or we have apartment buildings across the street.
That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking about the height and the loss of privacy for those directly abutting the property who are going to be most affected.
Well, we'd like to change the whole outlay of it. What we'd like is we would like at least five townhomes to come across the street instead of the way. Can we put the drawing back up?
Okay, so you like a different orientation to the street?
Yes, a totally different orientation.
Okay. Because my impression when you spoke was that you were supportive of the plan we saw before us.
I'm supportive of the change of zoning. That's what I'm supportive of.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification.
Thank you.
Oh, Ms. Moore, please come back. Councillor Elgar would like to cross-examine you.
No, my question is really simple. What is your address? Like, I'm trying to figure out
I
where you
am
live.
2314 Bellier Street, so I'm right across from the road going in.
Okay, that's what I want.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was quick and easy. Thank you, everybody. The next delegation, please, Madam Clerk.
Next delegation is Scott Newland.
Mr. Newland? Over here. Center stage, as we may be able perhaps to think about it. Council looks forward to your information.
If it's all right, I'd ask Emilio Fabri, who is the actual owner, to join me as well. We submitted a letter to town council.
My house is the one just on the east of the...
We're happy to have you do a duet.
Okay, all right. Wonderful, thank you. So I wanted to hopefully save time for council and not go through the entire list. We did submit a letter on behalf of myself, Emilio. I live next door to Emilio on the north side. to the east of the development, 2 properties. And then also, along with us, there was Beata, and who was across the road, and Kenny, who is my next door neighbor. And so we submitted a letter, and I assume you have it. I have a copy of it. And what I would like to say is that we in the letter, and I'll put a document here if you want to put up on the screen, a proposal of something like a frontage that we were.
You give us a second, we'll get the overhead lit. Oh, look, it's much better than normal. It may even, let's see if it can zoom in and keep focus. That's too much.
So this is an example of a property which is on Marine Drive.
Oh, yeah.
Marine Drive and Ontario Street. It's just south of our location, and it's an example of a frontage that we feel fits in nicely with that neighborhood, and has 2 stories, maybe a 3rd story there, which is, I don't know if that's a false story or not, but the garages and the main level is down below grade, so it allows for them to build bigger locations without having the height next door to the other properties. So that's one of the things we wanted to submit as well. You know, we have significant concerns that we wanted to address in here. Specifically, the privacy concerns are probably our number one, and the direction that the property is facing onto Emilio's property, and I'll let you maybe speak to that.
Yeah, exactly. So when we saw the original site plan, it just it didn't quite fit into the whole neighborhood. It looked like, as you guys said for the previous proposal, it just looked like overdevelopment for the sake of overdevelopment. I would have 7 backyards facing down into my backyard, and with the grade already being 2-3 feet higher, plus the 12-meter allowance, I would essentially have everybody on their balconies barbecuing, everybody staring right into the backyard. And of course, at that height, they'd be able to see into Scott's and into Kenny's and further and further. So there's a huge privacy issue there. Just the overall, how many units there are, again, it just seems to be very much overdeveloped. From the streetscape perspective, as Scott mentioned, something like that would obviously fit the neighborhood a lot better than 2 sides of the buildings. It was mentioned that parking there was adequate parking in the proposal, but I think that you might want to take a look at that again. I think there's some calculations in the zoning that it seems to be inadequate.
Visitor spaces specifically, there was,
Yeah.
I think, 4 visitor spaces we calculated needed about 11, or plus an additional handicap space. So we feel that is significantly under.
Yeah, and then roof lines, of course. So we all have 1.5-story, 2-story homes. I don't know what our zoning is for that, but it then drastically jumps to 40, 43 some odd feet with the difference in grade. So I mean, and it's a block. Essentially, the proposal is essentially 3 square blocks of buildings. So it's just it doesn't fit in with the neighborhood. It doesn't really make sense, and it could be so much better. I don't know how it can be redesigned, but something like that.
I think we are for townhomes as
Yeah.
well, and we believe that that's a better use of the space, and I believe that you know, the builder has identified, well, if this doesn't go through, we'll just go and throw up some multiplexes. I don't think that that's realistic. I think they agree as well that it's a better fit. We want to make sure that it's the right types of townhomes and the right orientation and fits into the neighborhood. Is this, you know, we have raised issues about, you know, traffic. That's an issue with, regardless of this development that's going on in Bellier Street. It's a through street now for a lot of cars coming along Lakeshore and trying to bypass that to Bronte. There's Eastview School, which is there, which a lot of parents are dropping off their kids and so on and so forth, and we want to make sure that remains a safe throughway.
Do you want to bring up garbage collections?
Yeah, we raised a whole bunch of things as well that I believe are more suitable for the site plan proposal of the council when it goes to site plan. But there's, you know, maintenance issues, garbage, et cetera, that need to be considered with, you know, their proposal identified, for example, street collection potentially as an option. I don't think that's reasonable. So, you know, we could go into a litany of things, but I don't know if we, you know, I think we've raised our key concerns here.
I think we've heard you, and I give you the reassurance that staff are well-versed in all the minutia of site plan, including protecting trees and putting up barriers against snowplows, killing them, and I mean, it's, I'm recalling many of the contributions that Councillor Elgar has made over the years to site plan control. So I know that staff will have made note that all the little details of site plan, and there's quite a, you're right, there's a catalog full of those. So thank you very much for your information. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, whoa, sorry, I let you go too soon. Councillor O'Meara would like to ask you something.
Thank you, Amelia and Scott, for coming. And I think I should have maybe asked Karen as well. If the application continues to remain unchanged the way it is presented here, are you in favor of that application the way it is currently presented or not?
No.
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, the next delegation. Mr. Kemmel, welcome back. You've been away so long.
You missed me.
We look forward to your information too.
Thank you. I'm just going to grab some water. Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council. My name is Oz Kamal again from MHBC. We are the agents on the proposal at 2311, 2319, and 2323 Belia Street. The subject property, as pointed out by staff, are 3 contiguous parcels, totaling approximately 0.44 hectares or 1.1 acres in size, and is currently occupied by a 2-story apartment building as well as a single detached dwelling. The character of the area is mixed. You have 6-plex apartment buildings to the west and to the north, coming down along Hickson and then down the side there. And then to the east, you have houses, single detached houses, as well as Eastview Public School at the far east side. The proposal as submitted is to provide 20 townhouse units. I have a plan there, which staff have seen. What council has seen from staff.
Mr. Kemmel, I don't want to really mess with your time allotment, but you heard staff's complaints about your plan. Would you speak to those rather than just refreshing our memory of what you applied for?
Sure. What we've done is we've met with staff and we had provided 2 alternative concepts, and I have 20 copies of those alternative concepts that I'd like on the public record.
Great. Jessica will get them from you and pass them out.
Thank you. I'll put the alternative concepts up. Concept A, which, as you can see, I think addresses some of the concerns we've heard tonight. We provided these concepts to staff and met with them as late as last Friday. Met with Charlie, Melissa, and Yana with the alternative designs, trying to address some of the comments received while town staff did us the courtesy of meeting. The concern, which was troubling to us, is that they noted that there wouldn't be enough time to resubmit and re-review, and which is why I want them here on the public record. We were advised by staff that moving forward, they have to move forward with a recommendation report on May 14th, and their internal deadline to do so requires a report by April 13th, which leaves us a little under 4 weeks. And this is concerning as town staff are saying that because of the new Planning Act legislation, they only have 150 days to process an application. And as pointed out by your own legal team here, you do currently, under the old planning regime, you had 120 days to process an application, so you got an extra 30 days. But my experience in Oakville was that you never rushed the 120 days when the applicant was trying to work with staff. Like, we would always work together on it, and maybe you would go beyond the 120 days, but you'd get the proposal right for council to consider. Now, based on the comments provided to us from town staff, our client's solicitor, as Councillor O'Meara had pointed out, Overland LLP provided a letter outlining their position with respect to the timelines and to fair processing of our application. What we'd like to see is that my client have an opportunity to continue working with town staff and a recommendation report not be forced upon council when we are still receiving comments. We don't even have all the comments yet. We just want to have a fair planning process with respect to these applications. For instance, we only received regional comments on Friday, and their comments require detailed discussions as they are saying our proposed accessory apartments are not appropriate replacements for rental housing and that primary rental suites are required on this site. Yet at the same time, their 2016 State of the Housing Report recognizes that 53.1% of rentals were living in purpose-built rental apartments and townhouse units. The remainder, which is approximately 46.9%, are renter households, likely in single or semi-detached dwellings, including secondary suite townhomes. So they recognize it in their report, but they're saying it's not an appropriate form of rental housing. So we
Would you agree that nothing in what you read imputes to the region approval of the, there's no endorsement by the region of how those, the balance are being housed, right?
There's no endorsement, there's just recognition.
Okay. I mean, I would just tell you that not very many people get very far taken on the region when it comes
No, that's fair,
to
but the
housing
region's,
or planning.
I understand, but the region's comments are also suggesting, and this is what's important, that the town's rental replacement housing policies and the town's official plan don't conform to the PPS, the growth plan, and they're not, and there's no specific requirement in the town's plan. The Livable Oakville Plan, as you all know, was approved by the province, the region, the OMB, as being in conformity with the growth plan and consistent with the PPS. We respectfully disagree with the region's application of their policies to this site as it conforms with land use and density, and for which only a rezoning is being considered. As such, further discussion is required. What we'd like to do is have town and region in a meeting together so we can all talk about it. But again, we only have less than 4 weeks to do that.
How long a meeting do you need?
Can you do it today?
Well, today might be a little used up, but I could arrange something tomorrow. Look, are you aware of the Growth Plan 2017 or Growth Plan 2 has been in effect since last July?
Yes.
So I'm not sure that we're free to disagree with the region's judgment there. I don't know how anybody could have conformed yet to that.
That's fair, and that's your opinion. I can appreciate that. Now, what else is disappointing for us is the fact that we tried to meet with the region on several occasions to get an understanding of where they sit with these policies. We were chasing them up from mid last year, and they never wanted to sit down with us on this. And instead, we get this approximately 3 months after our application is deemed complete, and we don't have time to respond. Now, we understand that there's a lot of concern raised by town staff and the community with respect to the proposal. As I noted before, we held a community meeting in June I didn't say it because we skipped it, but we held a community meeting in June 2017, and that meeting we heard concerns raised about additional rental housing in the area. People don't want to see apartments here. Since then, we also had the immediate neighbor who was just up before me raising concerns, and we made a commitment at that meeting to work with him along with the larger community to address concerns raised. Again, how are we going to do that if there's going to be a refusal report or a recommendation report for refusal in approximately 4 weeks is due? We don't have the time. To meet with them, revise the plans, resubmit, and have town respond to that resubmission. We made the commitment to provide alternative designs, which I provided to you, and work with staff, community, and council. although we've made this commitment, we've been advised that although we still don't have all the comments on this application, we still have outstanding comments, there isn't enough time to respond to as town staff have to meet their deadline and provide a recommendation report to council by May 14th. This invariably means that they're going to recommend a refusal on this application before the planning process has even been completed. And as such, my client would have to go back to the permitted zoning and contemplate redevelopment options in accordance with the enforced zoning, which the residents aren't wrong. Enforced zoning says sixplexes here. We don't want to do that. We want townhouses here. Or the alternative, there's an alternative of retirement homes. Again, while we are here to receive comments, we also ask that we are afforded an appropriate time frame by which to receive and respond to comments which are still coming in on this application. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, I know the only question I have for you on that point really is a question for your legal representative or perhaps your client, and probably more appropriate for a discussion between our solicitor and yours. It may be a way that you could make an agreement that would satisfy our concern about the timelines. The timelines are given, as you understand, and they're not invented by us. So I certainly don't want to negotiate that.
I wouldn't want to do that here either.
Tonight. But given the appropriate assurances, it's not out of the question. Council would at least listen to a proposal that protected it from the jeopardy of not having a decision and being appealed, right? So that's the nub that this turns on.
No, and that's a fair point. The only thing that I wanted to say is, if we're given the opportunity to continue our discussions with town staff, I'm showing you a concept that partially addresses what we've been taught, what you've heard from residents. There's no appeal. Like, we don't want to appeal as much as you do because it costs my client who's here today a lot of money to have professional consultants all prepare for a full hearing. They don't want to do that. They were essentially looking at a zoning option that was reducing the type of development that you would normally see if you were going to go as of right with the zoning that is today. So we thought that it would be a simple application, and unfortunately, it hasn't been so far.
So, as they say in Hollywood, perhaps your people can talk with our people.
Would love to.
All right. Are our people prepared to talk to their people? Mr. Solicitor, I'm looking at you.
Through you, to you, Mayor Burton. Of course, staff are always prepared to discuss matters with applicants, but I would caution about the ability to essentially contract out of a statutory right of appeal, and whether or not that's actually enforceable.
It remains to be seen. So perhaps there's some kind of quid pro quo or guarantee that would be meaningful. Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you for raising that, because that was a question I was going to ask. Was there a willingness to try to address something that still is true to our legal and provincial regulations? I guess hearing you say that your client's willing to work with staff and they're wanting to work with the residents in the area to find something that can be a soft place to land, so to speak. I'm a little concerned about the comments I heard earlier from some of the delegates saying that it basically was presented to them, either you take this development or we're giving you the other. And to me, that didn't sound like a very positive framework from which to work with the residents. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond.
No, so I think what some of the residents may have heard in the past is we're seeking a zoning that essentially takes away apartment buildings and puts in townhouses, which is typically a lesser development form. I think that's fair to say. But if we get a refusal report that goes to council, my applicant has two options. One is appeal, or the other one is to drop the application and just look at his as-of-right permissions. And his as-of-right permissions are to do sixplexes. That's what the site-specific zoning was designed for. And we don't want to do that. My client was just saying he wants to tell you that he does not want to do that. I'm committed to tell you that we don't want to do that. We need time though, because you can't have a meeting, you can't have a public meeting in February. I try to meet with staff on Friday and they say, well, there's no real point in meeting because like we can't really do much here. Like, well, there's no discussion there. That's not like, I want our people to call your people, but your people got to call us back.
I believe our people will call you back if I heard our solicitor correctly.
Fair.
Councilor O'Meara.
Well, and I too, I don't, I also want to thank the owner of the property for his willingness to work with the residents. I've seen it twice now, and it's very appreciated. And I guess I would put it out there, if you can't hear back from the region in 3 months, you can call myself or the mayor, and we will ensure you get a call back. That's what we're here for. That's our job. We want to try and make sure that something comes together amicable. As our planning director said at the beginning, this is a new process that we're working our way through, and both sides on that. And we need to start everything earlier, and I think that's where we're both up against it a little bit here. But again, Your Worship, I would be in favor of your people calling his people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Mayor Burton, I just wanted to add to the discussion and say I think there's 3 options really in front of the applicant to move forward. One, they can withdraw the application and live with their as of right, as was pointed out. They could continue with the application, and if we report within the 150 days, they have all the rights of appeal. The third option is they could withdraw their application, work with staff, as we've asked them to work with since before they even filed the application, try and find a solution with the residents, and then we'll process their application at a later date. So there is a third option in this package for them to consider in terms of moving forward.
Mr. Kimmel, your client leapt up at that. Does he have something that he wants to add to that discussion or not? He sat back down very quickly too.
With respect, we did understand that, and one of the things that we asked was, if we were to withdraw our application, would my client get a partial refund? Because he's gone through this process, he's hosted multiple meetings, he's gone through there's been significant cost to him. He was told no. He forfeits his fees, and then he has to go and reapply again and go to the same process again. So he's already in the process.
Thank you for the suggestion. The planning director has been prompted by your remarks to offer something.
Okay.
Mr. Simeone.
Through you, Your Worship, to Council. So we had, the fees bylaw allows the Director of Planning to consider requests for refunds under certain circumstances and conditions. In this case, when the request came through, I looked at it and determined that the conditions that Council has set forth in the fee bylaw would not provide a refund to the applicant at this time, insofar as we've gone to having a public meeting and a staff report had been prepared. So the answer was based on a review of the fee bylaw.
I'll have to think about that. All right, anything else, Mr. Kimmel?
No, again, we just want to have more time to work with everybody. That's all we're looking for.
Thank you very much for your information. Madam Clerk, are there other delegations?
That's the last listed delegation.
Thank you. Has anyone else been prompted to come up with new information for council? Please come on. Ms. Thornborough, I think I recognize you. Council looks forward to your information.
I have some literature.
Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council and planning staff, and members of the public. Thank you for allowing me to delegate this evening on item 6 of your agenda, Bellier Developments, Inc. Oh, that's mine. Thank you. So On analysis of this application, the Bronte Village Residents Association does not support the proposal in its current form. It doesn't conform to the livable Oakville plan and imposes intensification levels on the area that does not support sustainable development. As association, we have always worked tirelessly with our residents to ensure that we look to see sustainable and reasonable development go forward within the prescribed limits of the area. And this application seeks to go outside of what we deem reasonable levels of intensification. So I've outlined a couple of points, and I'll go through them, and then we've put together some analysis based on the current zoning in the surrounding residential area, as well as that proposed by the applicant. In its current form, it doesn't conform to the livable Oakville plan, and it doesn't consider or respect the current zoning of the surrounding residential area. So I'd like to point out just very briefly for those in the public and for council here, the site in question would seek to impose medium-density residential within that area. And whilst it is zoned within a block of medium, the vast majority of the area is zoned as low-density residential and falls outside of the growth residential, the growth review, the Bronte growth review, and has an impact to destabilize the current residential area. The current application does not respect privacy or the character of the surrounding dwellings with the height and three-story dwellings and the contemporary design. It looks to possibly increase traffic with the additional dwellings and residents in the area. It imposes less space for functional services and a possible impact to stormwater management as well as routine and seasonal maintenance. Inadequate parking is proposed for this level of development. And furthermore, negative impact to the tree canopy, clear cutting at least 94% of the trees on the area, and the associated environmental impact that comes with that. This proposal significantly alters the character of the existing neighborhood and is in an area that is not designated for growth and falls outside of the Bronte Growth Area Review. In analyzing the current zoning bylaws of the area and that of proposed, the area marked in green is residential RL3, and most of the area, and I'll just put this back up to show members of council and the staff that most of the area, existing surrounding area, is of the zoning of RL3 and possibly RL5. And the current zoning grandfathered in is RM4, and they're looking to change it to RM1. So if we were to use the basis of the majority of the zoning of the residential area, it would stand to reason we would look at RL3, 5, and 6, with weighting towards the RL3. So right now it's RM4, hoping to have the proposal go forward with an amendment to RM1. So just analyzing RM1 as opposed to RL3, which is the designation for the majority of the surrounding areas, we can see the impact on a minimum lot area is an increase of 422% fold. We can also see that the minimum front yard is increased by 43%. There is a negative impact on the minimum interior side yard of 100%. Rear yard of 20%, an increase in stories to the tune of 50%, so that's taking it from 2 to 3 in this proposal. And the percentage increase in maximum lot coverage for the dwelling, if we consider space required for maneuverability and services to up to a lot coverage of 80%, it would then impose a 40 to 45% increase from the RL3 designation. The current zoning with under RL3 allows for 557.5 square meters minimum lot coverage. So this would be reduced to 135, going to a townhouse development, which would then take us from perhaps 7 right now under RL3 of detached dwellings to 20 townhouses. So that is a significant increase in intensification of 185%. What is particularly concerning is the dialogue that's going on where there seems to be some sort of, is it a scare tactic for the residents? That if we don't accept the current proposal, well, RM goes forward and we have to consider what will be imposed then. I do believe that the applicant will have to consider the site application at that point, but if he is indeed willing to work with the residents, and he has the third option as outlined by the commissioner here tonight, and reconsider his application, then a better dialogue needs to happen with both the residents, the town and the planners, and of course the applicant as to what makes best fit for the area. And certainly not under the pretext of a scare tactic that if you don't accept townhouses, this is what we're going to come and impose in your area. Because if this is the kind of development that this town council, or the tactics that this council would seek to approve, then as residents, we should have a problem with that. This is an area that is largely low density and has detached dwellings. And we as residents have voiced concerns, and you've heard our concerns initiating the residential character study, in knowing that either going outside of variances or allowing developers to come in and impose their will on our areas, it is changing the stability and the character of our neighborhoods. We have the growth area review where we have a demarked area which allows for growth so that we can specifically allow for stability in our residential areas. This development does not look to respect that. It looks to impose its development criteria on us as a community, on us who are equity holders in this community. So I look at council to refuse this application, and I look at the planning department to consider it as carefully, because there isn't respect of character in having streetscapes, design form, and intensification levels that really meet the requirements of the neighborhood. This is an opportunity for us to go back to the drawing board and work collectively together and come up with a proposal that makes sense for all of us. It's not just about the bottom line for a developer, but it is for us all as a community and a municipality. And so under that note, I would employ that we do not accept this application in its current form, and we work collectively to find a solution that is best suited for our community and our municipality.
Thank you, Ms. Thornborough, for your information. Questions? Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
That's it? No questions?
All right, council, let's turn to the planning director to summarize what he's caught in the fishnet of issues for the information report.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, just to reiterate, the matters I'm addressing here are specifically the input we received from council tonight, in addition to all the other information the delegates have provided us. So the analysis of the following matters of interest to council be included as part of the recommendation report. So A, do we know the heights of similar buildings to surrounding the property east, west, north, and south? B, can we investigate the affordable rental numbers for 2017 if available? C, concerns regarding Bellier, i.e. that it's overbuilt, there's a transition that needs to be considered, is it appropriate and suitable for the area in terms of final design? D, consider combining this application with the south side of Hickson Street in order to clean them up. I'm not sure that one, but we have it noted, Your Worship. E, planning to consider, as of right, the 12 meters in the zoning bylaw and how this can be reconciled in light of the livable Oakville policies of compatibility in 1119.
Yes, and on that point about 1119, can you broaden it to all factors? Because I think there's more than height at play here. So thank you very much. I'll look for a motion from Councillor O'Meara.
I'm not sure if I heard parking in there. I apologize, but I thought I've heard parking a few times, but there were parking concerns in terms of how that masses. And I know that it has been mentioned in some other members' comments, but I'd just like to make sure that it's been brought up about about the water management and the water in that area. The water table it used to be Lake Ontario at some point, I'm sure of it. So those would be great. And then I would be happy to move receipt.
Thank you very much. Mr. Planning Director.
Through your worship, just want to clarify with the councillor. So the parking as referenced by members of the council or the members of the audience? Because my comments were dealing with members of council.
I just mentioned it.
So I've got it, thank you. And I note water management, thank you.
He's adopting by mention. Anything else? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Thank you very much. Now, number 7, Charlie McConnell. This is a public meeting report, just like the other two. Not a decision night, an information night. And this concerns a zoning bylaw amendment application for All Seniors Care Acquisitions Limited at 2135 Dundas Street West, which I believe is next or near to the hospital. And if we give our attention to our planner, Charlie McConnell, he will summarize for the public what we're about to discuss.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, and members of council. So this is a public meeting related to a zoning application that has been submitted by All Seniors Care Acquisitions Limited to permit one building ranging in height from 4 to 6 stories, comprising of 98 assisted living units and 84 total care seniors units. The report can be found on page 211 of tonight's agenda. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain any public input related to this application. No recommendations on the application is being proposed this evening. Staff will return in the future following the comprehensive review of the application with a recommendation report. I'll just note with respect to the applicability of Bill 139, this application was submitted on December 6th, just a few days before the royal assent was given to Bill 139. The application was deemed complete after the royal assent was given, so I understand that the old rules of the Ontario Municipal Board may apply. I think in the abundance of caution, we can still endeavor to glean this evening as many of the technical issues that may arise from council and from the public for consideration by staff. Carrying on, the subject lands are located on the north side of Dundas Street West, west of Hospital Gate, adjacent to the Oakville Hospital. The proposal, as I had mentioned, consists of a combination of both assisted living units and total care units, and there's a number of other amenity features that are to be provided within the building, such as a theater, a chapel, outdoor amenity terrace, a pool and running track, a library, a games room, dining rooms, therapy rooms, and secured outdoor amenity courtyards. So this rendering shows the view of the proposed development from the intersection of Hospital Gate and Dundas Street. So the subject lands are designated as employment district under the North Oakville West Secondary Plan, which permits employment generating uses such as industrial uses, office and service employment uses. Within the employment district, a health-oriented mixed-use node is shown on the north side of Dundas, west at Third Line. Within this node, a range of land uses may be permitted, including research and development facilities, medical and other offices, clinics, supportive housing, long-term care facilities, and rehabilitation facilities. So a complete analysis of the application will be undertaken and includes a review of the listed matters which have been identified to date. And more specifically, these will include whether the proposed land use is in fact permitted in the employment area or whether it would constitute an employment land conversion, whether the subject lands are part of or outside of the health-oriented mixed-use node, whether the introduction of a sensitive land use in this location would permit future employment on remaining employment lands, We would look at the impact on the urban structure of the town, if any, whether the lands are clean and suitable for a sensitive land use, whether the transportation and noise can be adequately mitigated, whether the full extent of the natural heritage system, which is situated to the west, can be protected. We would look at transportation impacts, shadow impact, the adequacy of proposed sanitary water and stormwater management servicing. We would look to the parking layout and the functionality of that parking, and also urban design considerations such as pedestrian-oriented streetscape and building massing. So comments received at the public meeting will also be considered as part of the comprehensive review. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. Council, we don't have any listed delegations, but we have a number of hands that have gone up. Councillor Hutchins?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Presently, the subject lands are designated employment. Did I hear you say that the proposed facility would be approved within those employment, or you're going to have to change sorry, I was getting a high-pitched whistle here. Or it has to be changed to allow that improvement? And if it's a change, does that set precedent for others to change employment lands?
Great. So through you, Your Worship, the lands are designated as employment in the North Oakville secondary plan and appear to fall within the mixed-use health node area as well. Under the employment designation, there are permissions for assisted housing. So staff will certainly evaluate it in greater detail to determine conformance with those policies. And if that's the case, then there would be no need to amend the official plan. But we'll look very carefully at the conformance with the existing official plan policies.
Councillor Elger?
Actually, the question is kind of the same. I guess I'm trying to understand how many people would be employed at this site, seeing it's 182 units and 84 are going to be total care units. Like, how many employees are we looking at?
So through you, Your Worship, I don't have the exact number of employees. I believe the applicant is in attendance this evening, and he might be able to answer that operational question.
But we will be looking at that to see if, in fact, if it needs a rezoning based on the fact it could be some kind of an employment also, I would think.
Right. Well, it is a rezoning. That's the purpose of this application, but the issue is whether or not it would conform with the official plan.
With our OP.
Right.
So we may have to do an OP amendment if, in fact, it doesn't.
If it was determined that it was contrary to the official plan and it was the introduction of, say, residential use, then that would be considered an employment land conversion and could only occur through a municipal comprehensive review.
But at this point, we're not saying it has to. You're going to do the review and come back and let us know.
That's correct.
I appreciate that. Well, I look forward to what the applicant is going to say with how many people would be employed there. So thanks very much for the application coming before us tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Elger. Councillor O'Meara?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was amazed to read what is going in here on top of that. It seems that somehow, seniors assisted living are able to fit in almost any zoning area because they just do for somehow. But I'm wondering, do we have a definition for places that now have movie theaters and chapels? And I mean, it seems like it's a little more than just seniors assisted living. Mm-hmm. It's numerous businesses running inside of an assisted living. And are we differentiating at all how we're defining this, or is it all just under the same umbrella? It's seniors assisted living, and whatever you bundle up under that roof, it all counts as seniors assisted living.
Through you, Your Worship, as I understand the application, these are the amenities that I listed would service the residents of the facility. So they're certainly not available to the general public. But they are general services that are being provided to those residents. So it goes hand in hand with the type of long-term care assistance being provided to individuals aging in place.
And again, maybe you know a little bit more about than I do on how this works, but would those costs be incurred somehow, and what the individuals who are aging in place are paying? Would they be paying through those, for those services in-house?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, I believe that is certainly the case.
Thank you.
The older you get, the more you'll be familiar with this. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, along the same lines with respect, I'm looking at some of the amenities. Running track for seniors assisted. I don't think a running track's got to be appropriate. Maybe a walking track, but running track. So I have a real issue with the land use, with respect to it. The running track, I don't see how that's part of an assisted living for seniors. I see, so I have a real concern about the usage. So is there any definition that we can have a bit more clarity on that?
So through you, Your Worship, that's certainly something that staff can look at, what the associated amenity features might be, and if there's the opportunity to provide greater clarity.
Thank you.
I think what it might be alluding to is some type of exercise facility.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're
available.
looking for, is just a little bit more definition, because a running track can mean all kinds of things.
Right.
Thanks.
Councillor, I'm going to circulate for you an article I recently found that, Councillor Chisholm, that talks about how at elderly ages you live a lot longer if you bike and run and exercise every day. So perhaps you and I can take some of that medicine.
I totally agree with you, Worship. It's just when it's assisted senior center, that's what I just want to have clarification what that means. So it's very clear.
Mr. McConnell, I was very interested in your comment about the appropriateness of a sensitive use in terms of what it might do to sterilize or otherwise reduce the usability of the remaining employment lands. And so you captured my concern in your report already.
And we'll certainly address that in the final staff report.
Seems like I mean, I have a long-standing interest in the old D guidelines, and I'm proud of the use that we've made of those concepts in livable Oakville, and I'd like to see us always have that in mind. And as you know, we have a similar concern about protecting employment lands on Tremaine Road, where we're in a friendly fight with our neighbor over employment conversion, as it seems it's turning out to be.
Exactly.
Councillor Elgar?
Yeah, a couple of things. Just one quick comment, Mayor Burton. We've come a long way. In early 2000, this area was going to be for welding shops, if you remember, and it's documented that's what it was going to be. So we have come a long way as far as employment. But with regard to this site, I think people may be getting the wrong idea. Can you tell me, will there be individual kitchens in each unit, or is it going to be communal kitchen for everyone to eat?
Through you, Your Worship, I understand that in the assisted living units, they won't have full kitchens. I think they would have a small sink, maybe a microwave, a hot plate where they could make their own snacks or tea. But it wouldn't be full kitchen facilities, and there would be common dining facilities within the facility.
Yeah, that's what I understand also. I don't think it's anybody that's in training for the Olympics with the running track at all. Thank you.
I'd just like to point out that, I mean, I'll give you a personal example. My dad is in a place where there's a full range of these options. There's 2-bedroom apartments with a full kitchen and access to a dining room when you don't feel like cooking, and there's units that are smaller with no kitchen because you've presumably got to a point where you are beyond being put to that work and you go to the dining room. There's a lot of these places, they have something, they see people as moving through a bunch of stages and they accommodate. Councillor Knoll?
Your Worship, just for some context, would this be a similar, just to help us get our heads around this, is this similar in nature to Amica and Chartwell and those sorts of facilities?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, I believe.
Yeah, okay,
most
so I
certainly
know
it is.
exactly what we're talking about. Thank you. That's great.
Yes, those of us who are old enough to have friends in those places know exactly what this is. All right, well then, Councillor Elgar or Councillor Lapworth, would you like to move receipt?
I'll move if there's no delegate.
Are there any members of the public here with information for council on this file? There weren't any registered. moved by Councillor Elgar, subject to the planning director's submissions.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to members of council. Again, I'm here to provide a list so that there's agreement on what members of council have provided by way of comment to staff, so that we're sure to include that in the recommendation report. So it's item A, revisit the issue of potential employment land conversion so that we are certain that we're in conformity with the growth plan. There was actually 2 points on that. One was dealing with how many employees are there, or does this need an official plan amendment? Is it considered a an employment conversion? Twice we've come upon the issues of use. Do we have a definition of the uses that are bundled around and potentially considered accessory to the permitted main use of assisted housing or assisted living? And so we have an issue with the uses proposed and how this bundle relates to assisted living. We're concerned about this has an impact on the sensitive land uses by way of sterilization, so we have to be mindful of that. We've looked into the issue of kitchens. I think that was addressed, but we're noting it.
No, on sensitive, it is a sensitive land use.
Yes.
And so will the fact of having, if we have a sensitive land use there, will it hurt the usability of our other employment lands?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll clarify that. Thank you. That's the list we have.
All those in favor? Oh, Councillor Adams has...
I just want to ask a clarification question about the process here. So we're receiving the captured list of comments or concerns that have been brought forward, but the report itself includes an already prepared list of concerns or matters to be considered. I presume that those are also part of the list that are to be considered and reviewed.
Yes, you're receiving the report and the additional concerns expressed by council, and basically it's like the movie Moneyball. It's a process.
This isn't, but I wanted to make sure that this is an add-on. This is the first time that we've done this slightly new process, and I want to make sure that we all understand what it looks like and the public understand.
This is the third time tonight we've done this, and it is an add-on.
Yeah.
Okay. And did I call the vote? All in favor? It's passed. Now let's see, is there an 8?
Yes, but this is a public hearing, number 9, so it was listed incorrectly, so we have to vote 9.
Oh. All right. So now, item number 9, the recommendation report for the licensing bylaw and town-initiated zoning bylaw amendment for short... Pardon?
It's not a public.
Well, it's you or the clerk? I don't know.
Number 8 is not a public hearing. It was, item 9 was listed incorrectly. It is a public hearing, so we would deal with it first.
So unless council wishes, we can do 8 next. Actually, let's do 8. Councillor Duddick, the chair recognizes you.
Thank you. Just to lighten the load considerably for the agenda, I'd be willing to move item number 8 without a presentation. We've met with staff, Councillor Chisholm, myself, and the BIA Executive Director, and we're very pleased with the recommendation, so I'll be pleased to move it. And I'd also give you a motion for item 10 as well at the same time to really lighten the load.
Thank you, Councillor Duddick. Those are both very welcome. Are there members of the public with information for council on the Kerr Village Community Improvement Plan Building Facade Improvement Grant Program? I'm going to put the vote on Councillor Hutchins.
I had just one thing to say on the Kerr Village, if I may.
Tread lightly.
Okay. No, I think it's a terrific program, and what I'd like to do is say, is there a way of extending it to Lakeshore when eventually that gets all put back together and doing something along those sort of lines? I know the money was collected from Kerr Village, so it's going back to Kerr Village and so on, but I think it's a terrific idea.
It's always possible. Shall I call the vote on item 8? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Item 8 carries. I'm going to call the vote on item 10. All those in favor? And that is carried. Now, number 9. We managed to do it out of order anyway. Brad and Jim, away you go.
So good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Tonight's public meeting and recommendation report provides an overview of the proposed town-initiated zoning bylaw amendments for short-term accommodations and bed and breakfast establishments, as well as an overview of the proposed licensing bylaw to license, regulate, and govern short-term accommodations and bed and breakfasts across the town. The first portion of tonight's presentation will deal with the zoning bylaw amendments, and the second half, I will hand the presentation over to Jim Barry, the Director of Municipal Enforcement, to present the licensing bylaw. Short-term accommodations are typically described as a rental accommodation provided for a short period of time, generally less than 1 month. Over the past decade, there has been an increase in the use of short-term accommodations with the growing popularity of web-based companies that connect people with available units. As a result, concerns about short-term accommodations in Oakville were identified. And in October of 2016, Council directed staff to prepare a report on licensing short-term accommodations such as Airbnb in Oakville. The review was led by the Municipal Enforcement Services Department and informed by a cross-departmental team, including staff from the clerks, fire, building, planning, enforcement service, and legal departments. The review identified that the town's zoning bylaws needed to be updated to recognize short-term accommodations as a use and to align with the proposed bylaw to license short-term accommodations. In September of 2017, the Community Services Committee received a report providing a detailed review of short-term accommodations in Oakville, including public consultation and input, a best practice review, issues identification, and key findings. The report was received by Council in September 2017, and staff were directed to hold a statutory public meeting under the Planning Act to bring forward the draft zoning bylaw amendments for short-term accommodation. And on January 15th, Planning and Development Council hosted a stat public meeting on the proposed zoning bylaw to solicit public comment. One letter was received by a representative of Airbnb, and no oral delegations were made at the meeting. Based on comments received at the statutory public meeting in January, and in consideration of comments from council made at the meeting, no changes have been proposed to the recommended zoning bylaw amendments other than renumbering certain sections for housekeeping purposes. Additional comments have been received since the notice of this meeting was provided, which council will have in receipt tonight. Through the recommendation report before you this evening, the zoning bylaw amendments were assessed and, in the opinion of staff, are considered to be consistent with the provincial policy statement, conform to provincial plans, as well as the Halton Region and town official plans. The proposed zoning bylaw amendments before council this evening for your consideration for approval would add provisions to the town's zoning bylaws to permit and regulate short-term accommodations and modify regulations for bed and breakfast establishments within the town's 2 zoning bylaws. Zoning Bylaw 2014-14, which pertains to the lands south of Dundas Street and north of Highway 407, also pertaining to the livable Oakville planning area, and Zoning Bylaw 2009-189, which pertains to the lands north of Dundas Street and south of Highway 407, which is the North Oakville planning area. The amendments would allow for the implementation of the proposed licensing bylaw to license, regulate, and govern short-term accommodations and bed and breakfast establishments. The proposed amendments would establish a consistent framework within both of the town's zoning bylaws. The amendments to both zoning bylaws would add a definition of short-term accommodation to mean the provision of a dwelling unit which is used for the temporary lodging of the traveling public for a rental period not greater than 28 consecutive days. The proposed bylaw would also add regulations for short-term accommodations, including requiring that the short-term accommodation be operated by the person or persons whose principal residence is the dwelling in which the short-term accommodation is located, requiring that 1 additional off-street parking space be provided unless it can be accommodated within an existing visitor parking space, and requiring that a certificate of occupancy from the town be obtained to operate a short-term accommodation. And this certificate of occupancy would be required in order for the principal resident to obtain a license to operate the short-term accommodation. The proposed bylaw would permit short-term accommodations within a dwelling subject to obtaining a license in all zones that permit residential uses listed on the screen. This would include a range of housing types such as single detached houses, multiple attached houses and apartments, as well as secondary apartments. However, short-term accommodations would not be permitted in the same dwelling as a bed and breakfast, a lodging house, a private home daycare, or a daycare. In regard to bed and breakfast establishments, the proposed amendment for zoning bylaw 2014-14 would amend the definition of bed and breakfast and lodging unit to insert the underlined words noted on the slide. This is to add consistency with our other regulations. The amendments would also change the regulations for bed and breakfast establishments in both zoning bylaws to permit 3 lodging units within a bed and breakfast establishment, which is an increase from the current 2 lodging units, and permit a total residential floor area of 30% to be occupied by lodging units within a dwelling, which is an increase from the current permission of 25%. So with that brief overview of the proposed zoning, I will hand the presentation over to Jim Barry, Director of Municipal Enforcement, to present the recommended licensing bylaw.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of Council. I'm here tonight to speak to the licensing bylaw, the short-term accommodation licensing bylaw. The goals of the licensing bylaw, as we started out, were to maintain community character, create accountability in the home sharing market, and permit responsible home sharing. The bylaw is structured in a way that captures both short-term accommodations and bed and breakfasts, and functionally there are 2 types of licenses available through the process. A company license, so this is a license that a company like Airbnb, HomeAway, VRBO would obtain that would allow them to advertise short-term accommodations on their platform, or an individual operator's license. And this is required by each individual short-term accommodation or bed and breakfast operator to actually operate within the town. This methodology helps to support the goals of licensing by creating accountabilities in both the virtual and local pieces of the short-term accommodation spectrum. Upon application, certain documents and declarations will be required from the applicants. These documents and declarations support general licensing goals of health and safety, nuisance control, and consumer protection. Some application requirements applicable to the short-term accommodation companies include general liability insurance in the amount of $5 million, an electronic list of affiliated short-term accommodation operators, and this is to help with the enforcement process, as well as an indemnity in favor of the town. Application requirements applicable to short-term accommodation operators include criminal reference checks, HVAC inspections, insurance in the amount of $2 million, and electrical safety inspections. And I will say the electrical safety inspection is done on a one-time basis, so it's not a yearly inspection. When we look at regulations, along with the requirements, licensees will be required to follow specific regulations in the bylaw. Examples of some of the regulations are included on this slide. Based on concerns registered during consultation and since the bylaw was introduced in the fall, some of the most applicable regulations include a company's requirement to only advertise licensed short-term accommodations. And this is really critical in the enforcement process because a short-term accommodation company like Airbnb that lists a non-licensed short-term accommodation risks losing their license. There's also an operator's requirement to only be operated by a principal resident and not to cause a disturbance. And I think these 2 specific requirements address some of the issues we've heard about commercializing residential areas, as well as what initiated this process was disturbances in neighborhoods caused by short-term accommodations. Should a company or operator violate any of the regulations, the bylaw includes a suite of enforcement options to address the concerns registered. I thought I'd just take a quick moment to go over how enforcement works, because I think this is something that came up at the last meeting. And as previously stated, the bylaw includes regulations or rules that once passed will be in place for short-term accommodations. These rules will set the stage for effective enforcement. Prior to the effective date of the bylaw, staff will be doing a few things. We'll be getting the infrastructure in place to actually manage the intake of these applications and make sure we're looking at them in a holistic manner. But we'll also be messaging out to the companies and the short-term operators to make sure they're aware of the regulations in the bylaw. At the same time, we'll be working with an STA detection contractor. We've spoken with Host Compliance, but we'll be looking out to see who would be best to partner with to help us enforce the short-term accommodation bylaw. And the contractor would really be helping us with the online portion of enforcement, so monitoring online activity and advising us of illegal rentals that are advertised online. This will do a couple things. It'll allow for ongoing management of that online activity, as well as reduce the resources required internally to deal with the monitoring process. Oh, I don't know what just happened. But and that's the end of my present. No. Uh-oh.
Is that really the end of the presentation?
It might be. Let me see if I can do something, Brad. I don't know.
Click F5 and you can flick through them again, eh? We'll just do that.
There we go. Yeah, that's okay. Got to go back a little bit. All right. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. Sorry, I'll catch up here. So the companies will help us with the progressive enforcement process. At this time, enforcement staff will also be available to respond reactively to concerns from the public. And again, what we've heard, there are short-term accommodations out there currently that may not be affiliated with a short-term accommodation company, and staff will be available to look at those for rent businesses that aren't affiliated. And we'll also be looking at properties with long grass and those nuisance complaints that actually initiated this bylaw in the first place. When evidence of a violation is collected, enforcement staff will have several options available to them. They'll include administrative penalties or provincial offenses, court charges, or orders that are actually included in the bylaw. As with any bylaw, an officer will need to consider past history, severity of incident, and likelihood of reoccurrence when they're deciding which tool to use, but the suite of tools available will allow staff to achieve compliance in most of the issues. Should a licensed property not comply, it is possible when they're licensed to revoke or suspend a license, and that really allows us that tool to deal with the real problem properties. If we look at the principal resident policy, and this is something that's been included in the bylaw, and I'll speak to nightly and yearly caps as well, but the principal resident policy has been included in the bylaw to take on the role of some of the issues that we face if we include caps in the bylaw. So the principal resident requirement means that an owner of a short-term accommodation can only own one licensed accommodation at a time. If an owner owns a second unit and comes in and tries to get a license for that, they're going to be rejected. So if they would have to, if they want to operate, they're going to operate without a license, and they're going to face the penalties that are then included in the bylaw. And this is something that we don't have now. This is an effective way to enforce the program. So enforcement staff will be in a position to begin in progressive enforcement, which may result in, again, administrative penalties or Provincial Offences Act charges. And I would highlight that if we have repeat offenders and go to the courts on multiple occasions, of course we have escalating fines, but we also have the ability to search or to request court orders to stop violations. So there are tools available to us in this process. During the consultation and at council, we also had questions around caps, both consecutive night caps and overall yearly caps. I'll review both of them and start with the consecutive night caps. And consecutive night cap, simply put, establishes the number of nights a short-term accommodation can be rented consecutively. This number tends to vary from municipality to municipality, but over time it seems that 28 days is becoming the municipal standard. The town's proposed cap is 28 days. From an enforcement standpoint, this means that an investigating officer must prove that a short-term accommodation was rented for at least 29 days. This can be done by obtaining a rental agreements, if they exist, observing the property for 29 days, obtaining evidence such as witness statements, or some combination, which is most likely. The difficulty with proving violations of the cap is that the evidence is from behind closed doors. Simply seeing a vehicle or people going in and out of a property on its own wouldn't be enough to issue charges. Testimony from a renter or copies of leases would be the most effective way, but of course they're held by the person you're trying to investigate, so the likelihood of actually getting those, very slim. If we look at yearly caps, this is really just a variation of the consecutive night cap, and there is no real standard in the municipal bylaws that we've scanned. A lot of bylaws originally had a yearly cap, but if we look at what's happened, they have slowly been transitioning to a principal resident policy. And again, we would look to the same type of evidence that would be required, except it'd be required over a longer period of time. If we were considering a cap of, say, 100 days, to prove that, an officer may have to watch a property for 200 days just to prove there was a violation. So it becomes, or 365 depending on the violation. So it becomes a long process, almost impossible to enforce. The bylaw also includes a demerit point system, which has been in, it's the first demerit point system we've included in a bylaw, and this again allows us to look at what happens on a property holistically. So if there are confirmed orders, charges, administrative penalties on a property, that licensee can be and will be assessed demerit points, and if they reach 7 or 15, their license can be suspended or revoked. So it actually provides some penalty for actions that occur on a property. And this is an example of some information that was provided to us, and this was included in the first report, but from Host Compliance, the STA detection company, and this is a sample of the information that they can provide, but they will go deeper into analysis and provide us actual addresses. And I guess one of the things I thought was interesting when looking at the information they provided to us was the fact that between 2016 and 17, the numbers increased by 100%. So there were 100 STAs in Oakville in 2015 and 200 in 2016. So it increased by 100%. So we know we're on the radar. From a fee perspective, we've done an analysis based on full cost recovery. And this is for both administrative and enforcement costs. And on an annual basis, we see the fees being for a short-term accommodation company, $44,500, and for a short-term accommodation operator, $237. And these are the same fees that were presented in the September report. And the recommendations are before you. And one more slide. And we're available for questions.
Well, my goodness. Councillor Lischina.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you very much, Jim. I'm just looking for a clarification, I guess, in the new bylaw or the proposed bylaw. Going back to the Community Services Committee report, this one was dated August 25th, 2017. I'm just going to read from this. It says, during public consultation, noise and nuisance stemming from SDAs was identified as a significant concern, which you noted as well. To address this, SDA companies will be required to develop a complaint system, allowing neighbors to register concerns about SDAs in their area. The SDA companies will be required to develop a protocol to deal with issues brought to this attention and up to and including terminating the listing. I then looked at Schedule 2, because I assumed it would be under the short-term accommodation company shall. Maybe it's there, but I'm not sure. Do we have that in there? That we want the company to show us what their complaint system is for neighbors of the area? I mean, the only one I figured might be I, where it says, or any other issues arising from SDA operations, but that's very, very general compared to an actual complaint system. So if you could clarify that for me, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe you would look to Schedule 2 under the general regulations, and it is the dispute resolution or any other issues arising. So that gives the framework for us to require the what we've identified in the bylaw.
So you don't think we need to have that a little bit more specific for the SDA company to actually have that complaint system for the neighbors? That will be sufficient?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe we want to be careful with being too restrictive on this. We are asking them to provide a system. How they get to it, I think it could vary from business to business. So I believe the information there would suffice, or the request there would suffice.
Well, those are some of the issues brought to us by residents now who are complaining of STAs in their neighborhoods, and there doesn't seem to be a clear-cut way of having that on paper here, so I would just make that comment.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would also add that right now we absolutely don't have an effective way to deal with it because we don't have a framework around it or as I've said, a suite of enforcement tools for the officers that are going to respond to those calls. I'm not sure, I mean, having the company itself offer this complaint system is certainly a way to escalate concerns to their attention, but I think the real way that we're going to resolve issues is through the enforcement, through the demerit points, through the other tools that we've included in the bylaw.
Next, Councillor Adams. I think it's going to be everybody.
We might get around the whole table, who knows? We'll wait and find out. I thank you very much for all the material. It's very comprehensive. I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, and I think it's a really good start. And I look forward to seeing how it goes over the following year, and it may be an item that we eventually need to have a report back to see how it's gone over the first year, that kind of thing. But before we get to that, I just wanted to ask you about the issue of the property owner, the operator being within the jurisdiction, it being a primary residence. So in the, so I understand that there's a requirement to show principal residence. Is there a catch there that stops somebody from operating one in Oakville, one in Burlington, one in Mississauga, one in Milton? We're in a GTA environment where it's possible to be close enough to operate several, even though you may not be in one jurisdiction, so to speak. Does this catch that or not?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would say that likely only if the other jurisdiction had a bylaw that required a principal resident, proof of principal residence, the owner at that point may, depending on what information they provided another municipality, may get caught on that. But for us, they would have to provide us that information showing that they were the principal resident. And if they can't provide that because they're acting in some fashion in another municipality, they wouldn't be able to be licensed here.
So it's possible that they could operate one here, call it their principal residence, but then have another home in Burlington, and that's where they're really hanging out?
Sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. I thought you were asking, could they operate multiple short-term accommodations?
Well, that, but also, even though they might be showing a principal residence in Oakville, they might have an alternative residence somewhere else that they're largely staying at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they would be lying to us if they did. Is it possible that somebody could do that? I certainly couldn't stand here and say that no, and that somebody may not try. But they would have to provide us documents to show that they are the principal resident. And then if we find out that they're lying, they would lose their license.
Okay, so that's one of the high rank and demerit points, I'll call it. Very good. Within the bylaw itself, under local contact, it says means an agent or a representative of an owner who does not reside in the regional municipality of Halton, who is responsible for managing or addressing issues in relation to the owner's short-term accommodation. How is it if the owner's principal residence is that house or that apartment, whatever it is, how can they not reside here?
They would have to reside there. The issue comes in when people go on vacations, and what we want to make sure is that there is always somebody accountable for a property.
So a temporarily,
yeah,
an owner who is temporarily not residing is really the issue there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, through you, Mr. Mayor, we've heard this in the past. We've heard this even with our existing bed and breakfasts that, you know, they go on vacations, and we just wanted to make sure that we still had somebody accountable. If there was an issue, we could deal with it.
Okay, so my concern here was whether or not this was a some kind of out for somebody basically not being around ever. And as my colleague said, is this where the proverbial, the snowbird disappears for 6 months and leaves the house unoccupied? Okay, thanks very much.
Let's come around the circle to the next, no, Councillor Elgar, maybe?
Thank you. Mine was along the same line with regard to the short-term accommodation. The person can only own one property. What about if the wife owns a property? Is that another two? Then they can have two properties? Like, I'm not sure how that's going to work and how you're going to enforce it.
So, through you, Mr. Mayor, is it possible for two people to live at two different addresses? They would have to show that they live at two different addresses. And if that information, again, if we found out they weren't telling the truth, they faced penalty, they faced loss of license, and they also may face other income tax implications by having two different properties as principal residents, and that's something that may also impact their decisions.
Okay. Do we know now, it's gone from 100 to 201 units. Do we know now whether there are owners that have multiple units that are doing this? Have we checked this out?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, because we have nothing, we don't have a bylaw in place and we don't collect that information, there's no way to check that out. Okay. Anecdotally, we've heard there are people operating multiple units.
That's what I've heard too. That's the reason I'm asking. Okay, thank you. So once we get the bylaw, then you would be checking that out. Thank you.
Councillor Lapworth.
Thank you, Jim. Do you think in the future we may have any responsibility to report the licenses issued to the Canada Revenue Agency?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I haven't seen that requirement in any other situation, so I really can't. I'd be guessing.
Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Berry, if we could go right back to the start of the report, a number of us, I'm sure, have received comments and feedback from residents saying, well, just say no. Just you know, why are you even talking about it? Just say no. We do not have the ability under the provincial policy statement to do that. Our purpose here tonight is to put in some form of regulation so we can license and provide some sort of feedback way for our residents to express concerns, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I guess there's two parts to that answer. The first part is under the Municipal Act for businesses. We don't have the ability under the Municipal Act to prohibit a business. We have the ability to regulate it, which is what this bylaw does. So this establishes those regulations that then allow us to make sure it complies with the community standards. The second part of that is around the zoning. Could we not zone for it? And essentially we've done that now, and it's ineffective. So I think what the regime we've developed is the zoning that assists the licensing to allow us to make sure that it all works together.
And so when somebody comes to apply for their license, we'll get their identification and we'll see that that's their principal residence, and our expectation is that they will live there most of the time.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, our expectation is that they would occupy that as a principal resident.
Our difficulty will be in trying to establish how often they're away or how often they're living there, correct? Because we can't go knock on the door.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, we could knock on the door, but of course, I'm not sure that provides us the evidence we would need to do very much. Again, whenever we're dealing with a requirement to establish what's going on behind the closed doors of a residence, how long somebody is doing something behind those doors, it becomes very difficult. In those cases where somebody wants to try and circumvent the bylaw, it will make, my staff will have to work hard to gather that evidence, but this puts the framework in place to allow us to do that.
I appreciate that, and further to Councillor Elgar's comment, supposedly we have somebody that owns 3 nearby, and so they would have, it would be as easy as having one in an in-law's name, a son's name, a daughter-in-law, whatever, and they would be able to get around it in that manner.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if they all occupied those homes as principal residences, they would meet the requirement. If they don't, and complaints are registered, we will investigate, and again, if we find out they're in non-compliance, they're going to face charges and possibly losing their license.
All right, and last question, I'll pass it along. The $44,000 cost per license, which builds in enforcement and regulations and so on, that is for the company that we would recognize being an Airbnb or other type of company. Is it possible, or is it do we have any experience in other municipality where they have decided to exit the municipality where there is something like this as opposed to paying that kind of fee?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and I think this came through in a comments from Airbnb that this is a fee higher than they would have anticipated or they're used to. This is a fee that covers our costs. So what they choose to do at this point, that's really in their ballpark.
And I assume that if someone doesn't go through a firm such as Airbnb, there are other on-site ways for a private individual or small collective to fly below the radar?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they always have the ability to operate as a bed and breakfast, and as long as they conform to those regulations, they can do so.
Great. Thank you.
Councillor Robinson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was going to become involved in talking about illegal and unapproved facilities, but I've heard enough responses from the other councillors' questions that I think he's got it pretty good under control. So no more questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Worship. Just a question with respect to all the processes are going through here, Jim. And when we have to enforcement, and I see that we have some challenges there, and you said the staff have to get deep into the investigation. Infrastructurally, on your staffing, does this add to the workload? Are we looking at possible new FTEs coming forward in the 2019 budget?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, one of the things we're doing this year, and again, we'll be looking at all the non-tax-based licenses. We're doing a new model for licensing, so we'll be looking at how the resources needed to make sure we're enforcing them and making sure that the licenses themselves, the licensees, are paying for those resources. So we're doing a full assessment, and we'll be coming back to council with something on that.
All righty. Delegations, Madam Clerk? Yeah, that would be a good idea. Council, we need to go past the hour of 10 o'clock. Councillor Adams is moving that we go past the hour. All those in favor? Those opposed? I just want you to note how unusual it is for Councillor Adams to be in favor of it. So let's not waste another minute. Madam Clerk, would you call the the first delegation?
First delegation is Denicia Mesimchi.
I should go there? Yeah, okay, I will. You can come this way, it's okay. Can I go this way? Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome, Ms. Masimchi. Council looks forward to your information.
Good evening, Your Excellency, Mayor Barton, and honorable council members. In this submission, which I'll try to keep it very short if possible, I am asking for your permission to allow me to propose an amendment to Part 4, Section 1.1, D and E of the bylaw, of the zoning bylaw 2014-14, which with regard to accessory dwelling as a secondary unit, regulations which we can see at page 296 of the agenda, which regulation are included, this accessory dwelling is included in those regulations of page 296 in permitting dwellings to be used as short-term accommodations, which we can see as regulation 478, page 478. As per Part 423 of the bylaw 2018-37, the amendments I propose in accordance to that part, the amendments I proposed, and that part is at 296, page 296, the amendment I would like to propose, if you allowed me, is this. At 411D, to delete the lesser of, and to delete 75 square meters. In Part 4, 1.1E, that was D, and in E, to permit a separate entrance at the front door of a detached dwelling, where two conditions are going to be fulfilled. The first one, the front door is a double door. There is, and the second one is there is possibility to separate that door, double door, and to make by separation of an interior non-structural wall, which will permit to create two separate entrances without being in the same opening of the front door. It's possible to create a separation. In this way, those two separate entrances, one will be for the unit occupied by owner as primary residence. We are talking short-term accommodation. I didn't mention that. I told you what the part is there. That would permit one unit to be occupied by owner as a primary residence, and the other, to permit an accessory unit that could be created and comprise the whole second floor of the house, of the detached dwelling. There are many situations which we find in the modern houses, which they are larger than before 1980. And by this, if we allow this, acest amendment to be done, then this could happen only by respecting the consideration and reglementation of the bylaw 2018-037 regarding the short accommodation and all the legislation pertinent which we see, for example, page 248 and page 254 as per planning analysis. If I have time, it's not much, but just I'll try to find those pages. First of all, I'm looking at the zoning bylaw, which okay, an accessory, the delete in the 296 page 296, by deleting the lesser of, that will read as is: an accessory dwelling shall have a maximum floor area of 40% of the residential floor area of the detached dwelling or semi-detached dwelling. I'm sustaining at least detached dwelling which they permit their front door to be double. But if a semi-detached has that possibility, could be applied. And in this way, to delete also the 75.0 square meter, which is, if we read it all together, if we put of the lesser of 40% or 75 square meters, which is equivalent to with 831.33 square feet, then 40% never is going to apply for a larger detached homes. But only 75, which are that or second floor, is always larger than that 75 square meters. Then you cannot create a second floor as an accessory secondary dwelling unit for the purpose of short-term accommodation if you keep this regulation, the lesser of 40 or 75. Always 75 will apply, which is the area is too small for a second floor of the housing, for example, around above 2,000 square feet. Then all the houses around 3,000 square feet, living area, for example, as we have, is the living area including basement is 4,200 square feet, including basement. Then never that house could benefit of a 40%. A smaller house under 200 square feet will always benefit because it's right there at 40%. That's why I submit in this situation, first of all, if you allow me to have that proposal, please do it. I find this earlier. I didn't find about this for the meeting of January 15 or in September. Now with 254, I'm looking for 254 planning analysis at this bylaw 2018. 037 is saying here, when a principal resident of a main dwelling unit elects to rent their second unit short-term, subject to obtaining a license, it enables oversight something and provide flexibility for the use of the second unit, which may assist the principal resident in affording their home. And then, further, permitting a principal residence homeowner to rent a second unit on a short-term basis may attract current owners to build second units within their homes. As the home I gave you an example, you cannot build those, and there are so many houses in this after 80, built after 80. And, attract homeowners to build second units within their homes, adding to the overall stock of second units, which is a key policy objective. Once these units are created and become part of the overall housing stock, they can then be rented out on a short-term or long-term basis at the preference of principal residents or the needs of principal resident, the owner.
Ms.
Your Honor,
Massacci,
yes, I'm sorry, I know I don't have time. I think, in short, you know that I committed those requests before, but was different configuration. This amendment wasn't under direct, accessory unit direct under the amendments. I propose, if you allow me to have that. Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
thank you. We understand your issue, and we understand the way you come anytime the zoning is remotely under discussion to bring your proposal, but this is really not germane to the short-term accommodation licensing that we're doing tonight. You need to meet with the planning staff and discuss in detail, and you might want to start with a written request, because your concern isn't really about this. You have another concern entirely. So, and we're familiar with it. So I suggest to you that you have a better avenue forward if you meet with planners to try to arrive at a mutual understanding of this issue. All right? Does that help you? Or in other words, we're not going to do that tonight.
Can I respond while we are here? For about a year, we cannot rent. We have a unit like that.
If you don't talk to the microphone, I can't hear you.
Maybe we can rent it under short term.
If you could talk to the microphone.
I'm sorry.
The microphone.
Okay, I'm sorry. In our case, we try everything possible, sometimes unappropriated, as you mentioned, or so at the time, because we try to figure out how to rent this unit.
It's inappropriate here. I'm giving you a path forward by speaking to planners. If you need my office's help to arrange the meeting, you can call my office in the morning.
I did with many people, as I mentioned before. There's no way. I'm in the situation that the rental unit was dead. I hope that would be, but it wasn't. Again, the accessory unit.
Madam, I have to cut you off.
Yeah.
We're under time pressure.
I'm sorry.
The clock and the
yes,
meeting
thank you very
expires at
much.
10:30.
I appreciate it.
And your material is not in order. It's not germane to the discussion tonight. But thank you for coming. And if you call my office, I'll try to arrange a meeting to help you.
Okay, thank you very much for hearing me, and I'm sorry if I am inappropriate here, but we cannot rent, that's all, and we try, maybe we could do that.
We've heard you again.
Thank you.
And I think we understand your issue. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Are there any other delegations on this matter? Or is there a delegation on this matter, I perhaps should say? I see one, I think. I see two, I think. Ms. Hazlitt-Thiel, council looks forward to your remarks. We don't have a lot of time left in the meeting.
Quick. Good evening. My name is Janet Hazlitt-Thiel. I am the president of Joshua Creek, and I am here on their behalf. I think you would probably all agree with the statement that short-term rentals do not support community building and stable residential neighborhoods, and we speak to you often about that. However, we do understand that you are looking to regulate and to put restrictions in place that would limit the impact that short-term rentals could have on our community. I do have pause for concern when I hear a town staff member say we can't prohibit a business in our town. We can prohibit a business from operating within a residential community, is my understanding. However, I'll err to their knowledge. Somebody can't run a drive-through through the area that we are in. It's a business. You limit it, you restrict it, Perhaps this is the level of restriction that we can best get, but we do have some suggestions. First, we would like to support the principal residence. We think that that is critical. We believe that a total annual cap in nights is critical. I'm slightly confused, as are some of our board members, on the real benefit of 28 days and a break. We think the total yearly cap is probably much more, sends a much more powerful message that we want long-term rental in our community. If we have to have a sharing component, long-term rental benefits the community as a whole. Short-term rental does not. And finally, I would like to reinforce what Councillor that raised the complaint system. Clarity within the community of what is the complaint structure around this is essential. And it seems to be in behind the scenes with the short-term operator, and I think it needs to be at the forefront. Who can a resident call? How will it be addressed? And it should not just be our bylaw officers, it should be the operator. So we have concerns. If you had an opportunity to actually defer and not pass it tonight, I think there are other people in the community that continue to have concerns. Perhaps they didn't come out as forcefully in the process. We did attend at the actual public consultation. We were remiss in making comments in January. So in summary, if you have to pass it tonight, please ensure there's an annual cap, a principal residence, and as much regulation as possible so we don't erode community building within our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Ms. Hazlett-Thiel, perhaps you could be comforted with the idea that we could both pass it tonight and then work on improving it.
That's the best we can do then. Guess that's what we'll have to take.
Thank you. Okay. Any, Councillor Adams?
To be honest, it's not a question, but it was to reinforce that message because we've dealt with this.
There may not be a need.
I understand, but we've dealt with this same kind of thing on lodging houses where we've had to go back and redraft several times over, and you do have to have a starting point for it. That's all I can say.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Experience is a good teacher. Thank you.
Okay.
Next, Madam Clerk.
Oh, no, we're going to the public.
Good. What, fine, then look to council for a motion. Councillor O'Meara.
I'd be happy to move this, Your Worship. Back in 2016, the Brawny area went through, it was almost terrorized with short-term rentals where we had tax SWAT police out trying to deal with homes. It was an absolute nightmare, and I think our staff are doing all that they can to ensure that we bring it into the fold where we can monitor and take care of the residents in the established residential neighborhoods, and I'm happy to support the recommendations put forward here tonight.
All right, so that's as amended and on your desk this evening? That's right. Councillor Duddick?
Can we capture, and I agree with what Councillor Adams had said, to revisit or review this in a year's time possibly so we have an opportunity to capture data and to see whether it's working or needs improvement?
Well, Councillor, I believe, I don't think it's necessary. We would review it as soon as we get evidence which way to go on it, tighter or looser, right? So with your permission, I'll put the vote. All those in favor? Oh, sorry. Was there another? Councillor Giddings.
A comment, if I may. I had understood from Councillor Adams that my sense was that we were going to have a fairly quick turnaround in terms of coming up with further restrictions. Is that the year you're referring to?
I'm not referring to a year. I have proposals I'll circulate immediately. I think we've got to get started. Until we get our regulations and our licensing in place, we won't actually know anything except rumors that we hear third hand. So
I agree. Just I can't support the motion. We've spent far too much time in our area working on residential character studies and protection of stable neighborhoods, and I've just seen the effect it's had, and I will be voting against it.
For not being strict enough?
Correct. I've got a number of concerns in terms of strictness, how it's going to be enforced, and through no fault of our staff or the proposed bylaw, I just think it's going to be very difficult.
Well, I would invite you to bring changes by way of notice of motion and request for reports, and whether you vote for the start or not, I think the process is what's going to matter here as we go forward. So with everybody's permission, no. Councillor Adams?
Sorry, we started on this conversation, so I'll continue into it. So in terms of a report coming back, I would imagine it coming back in the first quarter of 2020, which would be the first quarter after a full year of the licensing being in place, because this comes in place in November 2018 going to 2019, and so by the time you get a report, it's going to be January 2020. That being said, what the mayor has indicated, if there are changes that you think we should consider, then we should hear them and consider amendments to the bylaw. But you can do that anytime. It doesn't need to be right now. It can be at any point through the process.
Council, we have an agenda to get through. I'm gonna call the vote. All those in favor? Those opposed? Would you like a recorded vote to record it? Then the clerk will record your vote in opposition, and that will suffice for the time it would take to stand up and sit down. So now I would like to ask you to turn your attention to item 12. No, maybe I want 11. I skipped over 11. So this is the Committee of Adjustment Options Report, and we have a presentation from the Planning Director, Mr. Simeone. And if we fail to finish by 10:30, and if Council refuses to go past 10:30, which is one of the choices Council has, we will have to resume on Wednesday. If people have their calendars, they might want to be checking that now. Mr. Simeone, please launch.
Thank you, Your Worship. As indicated, I'm dealing with item 11, page 451 on your agenda this evening, and it's dealing with options for the Committee of Adjustment. We've had discussions about this at the Livable Oakville Subcommittee, and there was some request there that was provided to staff to consider options for how the committee might be constituted. In addition to that, as you know, the committee is constituted to look at, or the Livable Oakville Subcommittee is to provide staff an opportunity to discuss matters of interest coming out of the Livable Oakville Review. And one of those issues was the stability of the residential neighborhoods, and that's a very important thing that we understand in planning. Specifically, there was a request to undertake a residential character study. And as you know, that was completed in last year, and I believe we came to you in late last year, early this year with our final recommendations. And we chose this slide to make the point. The slide shows two homes that both comply with existing zoning in this community. And this type of relationship between existing and proposed built form causes a lot of concern. I know we spent a lot of time on it in the planning department reviewing these types of matters. So we'll come back to that. I'm going to start with the staff recommendation, which is kind of odd. Staff are recommending in the report before you tonight that we move with the development of local minor variance criteria by way of a bylaw that would be unique and tailored to the issues that are unique and of interest to citizens of Oakville. But before we get to that part, I'll walk you through the options that we considered. So one of the clear options was simply eliminating the Committee of Adjustment, and that would mean there is no longer a minor variance function here in the Planning Department or with the town approval of land use planning matters in the town of Oakville. Everything would come to Council by way of a rezoning. So there would be only major variances, and Council would be the final arbitrator of that. For a number of reasons as outlined in the report, staff have not thought that we should move, or not recommended we move forward with that option. An additional option was to replace the committee members with either members of council or new members from the community. And again, for reasons stated in the report, we felt that that wasn't necessarily the best option to go forward. The third option you'll see on the screen is to establish a local appeal body. You may have heard about this. They've applied this in the City of Toronto. It comes, I believe, under their own specific City of Toronto legislation. We're not aware of any other jurisdiction in Ontario where this has been applied. and the experiences they've had, we understand are one of growing pains. It's an organization that costs a lot of money. Right now, that money is being paid for by the Ontario Municipal Board. So the City of Toronto is bearing that cost. And in all cases, it's not clear they're getting decisions that they were looking for. So they're incurred a cost. There's an extra bureaucracy to that. And in all cases, they're not getting what they're looking for. The last criteria we've established is that of establishing a local variance criteria or bylaw. So I believe it was in 2015, the Planning Act was amended to allow municipalities the opportunity under Bill 73 to, in addition to the 4 tests that we know of in the Planning Act for minor variances, that additional variances could be created that would further guide the committee and the community in terms of how minor variances would be considered. We think this is a good way to go because we think it takes 1119, which is a solid policy platform in livable Oakville, and allows us an opportunity to refine and adjust that with a higher level of precision in terms of the relationships you saw on the slide with the bigger house and the smaller house earlier in the presentation. And it also may provide some certainty in terms of what can be considered minor by narrowing the scope of what may be brought properly before the committee. This would be done by way of a standalone bylaw and would require and will require public consultation should council approve it going forward. And of course, that can be also appealed just like any zoning bylaw. So we just thought we'd run through very quickly, and I'm mindful of the time here, some of the things that may, and I'm just saying may, just for discussion, help us understand what criteria might be used. I'm looking here, if I can't find the mouse, where I'm pointing at the bottom of the screen. I'm pointing to what I believe to be the front lot line. So height is measured from established grade in the bylaw, and it's measured in this case on an interior lot at the center point of the front lot line, which is where I'm hovering with the mouse now. But you'll notice how the land goes up in this situation. So this house would actually be 8.89 meters where the bylaw would allow almost another meter on top of that. Some of us may or may not consider that a hardship, but it's just illustrative of what a minor variance might be useful for in a community. A very quick example here is you'll notice we have a creek system with lots backing on it. This would be, I assume, the top of bank or a floodplain limit of sorts. The way the bylaws work on this side where I'm hovering the mouse, that the percentage of lot coverage allowed is not relative to the whole lot, but only that portion of the lot outside of the flood restriction or the top of bank. So in this case, if you look across the street, let's say this person could have 30%. It's 30% comparable to the whole lot. Here, it's 30% of the smaller piece, which I'm trying to get my mouse to move on. So it's 30% of this. This would actually result in a situation where the houses may not be appropriate in terms of their size. I would also note the irregular shape of the blue line, which makes it almost impossible for us to come up with any one number which would allow these developments to proceed. It's not a case of saying one size fits all. Every lot would have a slightly different adjustment. It would be needed to be considered on a case-by-case basis. And lastly, another possible criteria, again, this is just by way of example, there are situations where it's necessary to have certain structures to allow for accessibility to structures. There's an example we see in the picture, and a minor variance might be an appropriate, quicker, cheaper process that could go forward. So contrary to the information in your staff report on page 461, there will not be a bylaw being brought forward in May, but there will be a draft bylaw with criteria being brought forth in May, so that's the only exception to that, with the public meeting and the adoption of the bylaw with the criteria, should you wish to go forward, being set for the P&D Council meeting in June. So again, we will be hosting a public information meeting. I believe it's now scheduled or contemplated for April 19th, and then we would have a series of dialogues on an as-needed basis coming to Council with the criteria again and a draft bylaw in May, adoption in June. And the recommendation before you is that staff proceed to prepare criteria and a draft bylaw for purposes of consultation with the community and coming back to this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In respect for the hour, I would ask that maybe, given that the recommendation here is to receive and draft, we may not need to engage in extensive questions at this early stage. And I think I see Councillor Lischina. You're good with that? So I would ask, for the public, we have a registered delegation, Mr. DeRosa. I wonder if you could, out of respect for the hour, Could you tell us if you're okay with the recommendation, rather than perhaps giving a long, a 10-minute delegation, because there isn't time for 10 minutes?
Actually, I'm here to speak in favor of the work that's been done currently, so I would support the recommendation.
Thank you, that's
And I'm
very
happy
helpful.
to save the time and follow with a written statement with a copy to all of you.
What a gentleman. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Council, a motion? Councillor Knoll. Councillor Knoll moves as recommended. All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. Number 12 is the Committee of Adjustment 2016 and 2017 Annual Activity Report for receipt. And it was going to be an opportunity for Commissioner Closey to introduce Timothy Lee. Commissioner, what are you going to do?
We have Timothy Lee, who is available for presentation, but I'm considering the hour, you may not want that. Tim Lee is the new manager of zoning and Committee of Adjustment. Alvio was the previous manager, which I think many of you have met, and I just wanted to let you know that.
Mr. Lee, Council welcomes you. We do not need your presentation. It was a great report. I need a motion to receive. Councillor Lapworth, all those in favor? The information is received. Council, that brings us to item number 13. Nadia and Jim are present to answer any questions. We have no registered delegations, and the report basically is for receipt. It's information. How do you want to proceed? Councillor Elger.
Well, if we're going to proceed, I do have some questions, and I can highlight them right now if you would like.
In that case, would you give me a motion to go past 10:30? Actually, you need to give me a motion to waive the procedure bylaw, and then a motion to go past 10:30.
Well, I will do that.
Councillor Elger moves waiving the procedure bylaw. That requires 9 of us. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh, that's 9 and plenty. Now we need a motion by Councillor Elger to go past 10:30. All those in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There were some falling hands over here, so I think we hit 7. Do we want to see them all again? What the heck? Let's see them all again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 at me. 8, 9, 10, 11. That's good. It's carried. Now, Councillor Elger.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't need a little concerned with the report. And if you go to, it's actually, it relates to areas, there are areas that in the town's 3 major growth areas, Midtown, Uptown, and Palermo, where they're saying that's maybe where a cannabis place could be. But I do have a huge issue with Palermo, based on the fact there's a high school, the Catholic French high school there, which is right there. And I can't imagine why we are saying Palermo when in fact we've got a Catholic high school there, which is current enrollment 630. They're already going to a 2-story. Like this school is growing. And I'm very disappointed to see that we're recommending Palermo as an area. And I'm wondering if something can be done. But I'm also extremely concerned, and I know you've mentioned nothing close to a school, but if you look at upper middle and third line, the plaza there, the school, the Glen Abbey High School, has 1,235 students that abut the plaza. And just down the road is Loyola, and it has 1,253 students personally. So you're talking 2,500 children within a 5-minute walk to allowing a cannabis shop at that location. And when I read the report, and staff are saying we really don't want it in the downtown, the Kerr, and the Bronte area, like we got to change this up a little bit. Even though we're just receiving this report, something is fundamentally wrong in my opinion.
Councillor, all you need to do is move an amendment to declare that it's the sense of council that we would not be a willing host in any area you care to name.
And I would be so
Councillor
willing
Adams
to
will
do
probably
that.
help you write it.
Okay. And I know we can't go with the town of Oakville because we are merely children of the province, and they've already said you are getting one, because I've gone through all of that. But Now that I've said that, I would want an amendment to
Do you want to
this.
write an amendment?
I will, but I'm going to need a few minutes and see how many people want to add to it.
We'll give you a minute.
Okay, I thank you.
Are there any others with concerns? Councillor Graham.
Well, back to the concern I originally had, which was enforcement and nuisance issues. This looks pretty bleak from the report. As far as we don't know how much it's going to cost us for any of the enforcement. We're not really sure how things are going to work, how much it's going to cost us to enforce all this. So I'm just wondering, is there any modeling or anything that's happened since you wrote this report that will give us some sense of the real cost that's been downloaded to us?
The answer is that it's on its way.
Well said, Mr. Barry. Thank you.
Councillor Adams, you're probably enjoying this.
I won't say anything about that.
Look at that expression.
I will ask, though, if our staff have any additional information with respect to the actions of the OCRC or the LCBO in the Oakville area since the writing of the report on March 1st, if there's been any additional information about sites or whatever.
I think the answer is no, not yet.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we have not had any additional information.
Councillor Knoll.
I have a similar request for additional information as to whether or not there's been any additional work on the whole issue of multi-tenant buildings in terms of seepage of odor and that sort of thing. And it's a similar answer. I mean, I think we're highlighting, if anything, the shortcomings of the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, nothing's changed with enforcement since the report was written. Okay. We do hope to hear more, but haven't.
Can I, and through you, Mr. Mayor, just we don't, just for clarity, we don't. Anything we advise the province is simply our advice. They don't have to follow anything we say in terms of this. If we say we don't want it in X community, they can put it in X community tomorrow. I understand, right? This is ultra virus for us to even for us to be directing the province. This is simply it's an exercise of principle, I guess, right?
Oakville has never shrunk from offering its advice to other people, even if they're not required to pay attention to it.
Yes. I've been told by my kids I do that too. So I guess on that basis then, I mean, if we can't narrow it down by community, why don't we make a general principle statement for the town, like Councillor Adams has suggested before, instead of cherry picking?
Why don't we wait and see what Councillor Elgar comes up with? Councillor Adams?
I thank you very much for the conversation. I'm not sure if we still have anybody in the public here who wish to provide information.
We do. Mr. Jacks is asked to represent himself on this issue.
Very good. The original thing that got referred to staff that generated this report is still in the agenda. It's still in the materials before us, and that is that should the Ontario Cannabis Retail Corporation continue with its plan to locate a retail location in Oakville, that the OCRC be requested to delay the implementation of a retail location in Oakville in order to provide transparent and substantive public consultation on the proposed location to ensure that the location is not in close proximity to schools and residential uses. The intent of that was to enact what they said they were going to do, which was consult with the municipality. They've done that in the briefest kind of way I can imagine, which is behind closed doors asking our staff their opinion. They have not come out to the public and said, what do you mean by proximity to schools or residential areas? And I still believe that they should have transparent and substantive public consultation on the matter. And so we can name a whole bunch of places where we would prefer them not go looking, but at the end of the day, they're the ones that should be transparent, and they're the ones that need to consult with the public.
And we are the ones who need to decide what we're going to say.
And I appreciate that.
You may be getting ready to move an amendment by pulling that up and seeing if you can get it passed this time instead of deferred like last time.
Right. So I might suggest that while Councillor Elgar is working with our staff trying to draft something, that he might consider starting with the terminology that's within the report there as a starting place.
Councillor Elgar, did you have a chance to hear what Councillor Adams was suggesting?
No, sorry.
Well, he's suggesting that the language that he proposed that we referred to this meeting that's in the report would cover off all our concerns and require them to boot to do honest consultation. And he's suggesting that the amendment's ready written, if you care to lift from the report the language of his motion that was referred to this report at the last time we considered this matter. How does that strike you?
And I might add that, obviously we had a particular location that we didn't support. I might say that in the terminology in the staff report where it says, for example, the Trafalgar Corridor, I might also suggest that the area that's immediately across from Sheridan College is probably not the greatest location. But, however, I mean, that's why I say we could probably each name locations in our wards that we think are probably not the right places. And so the real question is, where are the right places that they should go and look? The question is whether we name them or whether they have to come and ask.
Okay. Councillor, so what you're saying is that they have to have public consultation before anything is picked, any location, right?
That would certainly be my preference.
Okay. You know, so
because as I understand their process right now, it's after they've entered into some kind of agreement on a location that they'll then come and say, do you think this is okay?
that's a little too late.
Which
The horse has left the barn.
sounds to me like it's a little too late.
And I don't disagree. What I had staff help me write, the one thing is like the Palermo growth area, it should just be totally off bounds because of the school that's there. But if we go with the other where they have to come back before one is, then I will be fine with that recommendation at this point. Because we're just talking how far away from a school can you have one? Well, is it 100 meters, 400 meters, 500 meters? You know, if I go a kilometer, as staff said, then that would mean there'd be nothing in the town, maybe. Right. So I'm well, as long, they don't have to listen to us, but that's what I would say. Instead of what they're doing now is all behind closed doors and they come back afterwards. So I will go with that motion to make it simple at this time of night. I'm fine.
So, Councillor Elgar, let me just get something on the floor here, and we still have to hear from Mr. Jacks. Councillor Elgar is proposing now to add to the motion the motion, Councillor, that's in the motion that was presented by Councillor Adams and referred to this report, bring that up and add it to the recommendation. Is that right?
Right. Yeah.
And is everybody clear and okay with that? Or at least does everybody understand that? Everybody understands it. We'll find out how good they are with it. Are we ready to hear Mr. Jacks before we, Councillor Lischina?
Thank you. I just wanted a quick clarification from staff. When we had our last meeting, did we know that the LCBO staff have entered into discussions with landowners in the areas that staff had recommended? Or is that a new development since last meeting?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, they'd recently called us to indicate how they were moving forward. When we first met with them, they said that they were going to begin their search with their real estate firms in the areas that we had given them. So that was our clear understanding initially when we met with them.
So they're obviously moving pretty quickly then, because now they're actually already in discussions.
Their original time frame was to actually have building permits in by this point in time. They've delayed that because they probably will be opening them a little later, but that was their original time frame when they spoke to us late fall.
Which is even more important why we're having this discussion today.
All righty then. We know what we think we want to do. Let's hear from Mr. Jacks to see if we still agree after we hear from him. Mr. Art Jacks, representing himself. Welcome, sir. We look forward to your information.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for letting me speak. I didn't prepare anything because I didn't really think I'd get the opportunity to talk to anybody, but I'm not going to tell you where to put it I know you're really worried about kids and where it's going to go. Medical cannabis saved my life. This is not what you've been led to believe the last 90 years of prohibition. We need to educate the people. Our governments are trying to put the black market down. So far, my personal opinion, our government's charging too much. I wouldn't want to deal with my drug dealer. I don't want him to be the government because they're charging too much. They can charge that. The black market will charge less. You want to put a store in a place that's hard to reach, hard to get at? You're aiding the black market. You want to make it accessible. You want to educate children about the truth and the reality. I saw a conference in Europe last year, and they had a question and answer session at the end of the conference, and there was 8 specialists. They'd studied cannabis, each for over 2 decades. And they had to confess to the crowd, we've studied it and we consume it. We consume it because we're educated and we want the benefits of the plant. There's a really nice store that you're running away from. The LCBO store, Trafalgar and Lakeshore, right near March of Dimes, where there's a lot of challenged physically people in the immediate area, and a lot of them are cannabis patients. If you want to make it really accessible, stick it as close to the GO train as possible so people can access it. I haven't studied Oakville's map, but geez, I don't remember any schools right beside the GO train. If you could find a little nook and cranny there, that might be a good solution for the time being. 10 years from now, cannabis in Canada will be entirely different. If we're lucky, you'll be growing it in your yard and eating it in your salad. And I'm sorry to tell you this, but that will not have any psychoactive benefit. But you'll reap all the benefits of all the cannabinoids, the cancer-preventing ones, etc. So, there's something wrong in our society. Not only have we got a goof running the U.S., but alcohol's available everywhere. Alcohol kills people every day. Cannabis has killed no one. The reality is, it can be considered a drug, but when you relate it to all the other drugs, you have to consider the science and the safety of the drug. It has killed no one. I'm assuming everybody wants to go home, and I wouldn't mind medicating. And just so you know, I've been consuming it for an awful long time. I've studied it for 2 decades. And the sad part is, like all the new people that are waiting for recreational, I don't get high. I don't get high even if I take THC in vast quantities. What I do get is relief. And I walk amongst you like a normal person. If you saw me walk down the street 3 years ago, now I probably walk 3 times faster. And it's like somebody's lubricated my joints. I used to have a skateboard team. I was a professional skateboarder. And it's like taking German racing bearings and putting them in my knees. About 8 years ago, I went to a knee specialist, and I wanted to get my knees done. And I'm financially challenged. So I did the exercises, and I consumed cannabis for it and for that issue and a bunch of other problems. And last week I went to the same doctor, and he had no record of my knee problems in his records. He couldn't find me because cannabis had kept me away from banging on his door saying, I want new knees, and I want them now. Instead, hey, I can walk. Anyway, I won't bore you anymore. Your decision on this matter is very important. Not only are you protecting the children, but you're also protecting all of us in our society by making the truth come out and letting people have access in a respectable, dignified manner. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Jacks. We appreciate your information.
No offense, my mom's 96 and she calls it Jake's.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Minor technicality.
I'll try never to make that mistake again. Mr. Jakes.
No problem. Thank
Councillor Elger.
Just to be clear, you don't have a problem with it not being a store near 2,500 kids, though? Like you would agree it should maybe be a little further away?
I'm not in a rush to put it in kids' hands.
Okay, I appreciate
I'm
that.
in a rush to let mature adults make their own decision. And I'd like to see a path taken by the government that would give me a chance to get it at the best price financially. Right now, the government sells everything by the gram. 5 years ago, before I was, let's say 8 to 10 years ago, before I was a legal medical marijuana patient, I was a guy that had a doctor that said, take it as much as you want. I understand it's beneficial, but I won't sign for you. And now it's changed my life. It got me off opiates that the government's trying to fight. It would have killed me. I had a huge dose of opiates. If I wasn't actually doing something, I'd fall asleep, whether I was standing, sitting, driving a car, anything. And I've walked away from that through a very gradual reduction of opiates, not a big on-off switch, but fortunately cannabis has assisted me in that as well. Thank you for your time.
So, Council, as I understand it, our goal, I believe we're united in at least one goal here, and that is to get the province to live up to its promises, which would be, as I recall them, to be away from homes and schools and near transit to facilitate access. Is that everybody's recollection of what the promise was? All right, so I think we have a motion. Does everybody understand it? Councillor O'Meara.
Sorry, so it's the second half of the one on page 51, or is that correct? Okay, thank you.
Yes, this right here.
That's exactly right. So everybody's good on that, right? Page 51 for the exact language. Councillor Knoll.
Sorry, I'm going to be the skunk in the garden party. I guess using the term skunk and talking about marijuana is not the best thing to do, but I just want to, I'm not going to support the motion. And it's not that I'm not going to support the motion because I don't like the direction that you want to take it or that it's being suggested. My concern is that this report is full of, we don't know, we're not ready, they don't have the supplies, etc. Apartment building dwellers condominium unit dwellers are going to be faced with this massive problem the minute that this goes on the market. I'll be quick. Oh, thank you. I thought you were trying to hurry me up there. I have no problem with Mr. Jakes or others that need access to marijuana for medicinal purposes. I know several people, including a very lovely gentleman that I helped in his end stages of life, who got great relief from having access to byproducts of marijuana, not the inhaled, but the liquid form, I guess. So I have no issue with that. My issue is that we are, by passing a motion saying we want transparency, we want this, we want that, and talking about the locations, it's almost like we are condoning they are proceeding with this without having full understanding of the implications on policing, on multi-unit residential buildings, on what it's going to take for our bylaw to manage this, what it's going to take for police to manage this, for that matter, even the policy around citing. So, you know, I'm certain this is going to pass, but I just felt important for me, on principle, I'm opposed to the legalization of recreational marijuana. I have no ability to just fight that, but I am opposed to condoning the province's zeal and the federal government's zeal to get this into the mass market without having all the infrastructure in place. Last thing I'm going to say is that, notwithstanding what we decide here, they're going to do whatever they want. And if somehow we persuade them not to open a retail store in this town, everybody in Oakville will still have equal access to legalized marijuana through the mail order system that they've committed to. So on principle, I will not be supporting this, this motion.
Councillor, let me try to talk you into supporting this motion, because this motion actually does what you just said you want. What this motion does is it receives the information that they don't have their stuff together yet. You're acknowledging by receiving it, well, actually, receiving information is what we do all day. I mean, refusing to receive information is kind of a strange concept. The only operative part of this motion is we're asking the province that we expect them to consult better. That's what that says. And as I understand it, that's what you want.
If there's an additional terminology in that motion that says consult better and answer the objections and concerns by municipalities and police forces, then I'd be able to support it. My concern is that we're simply asking to consult more, so that's consulting on citing. I'm concerned about the whole issue of opening a cannabis store in town, condoning this thing without having all the necessary ducks in a row.
You might, anyway, Councillor Adams.
Let me give it a shot. So last we spoke of this matter at the previous council meeting, we did pass a motion that directed our staff to ask the province to satisfy the financial, social framework, location, and enforcement questions, which we've just spoken about, prior to choosing a retail location in Oakville. And that's because many of us have a whole bunch of concerns that have been in our reports or that are out there in the media, a whole bunch of issues that are out there. This motion that's now on the floor is to say that despite us asking them already to satisfy on those things, if they persist and wish to continue on their plan anyway, we want them to be transparent and provide some consultation. So, I'll leave it at that, but that's my reasoning for supporting it.
I can easily support a demand that we call the province to a higher level of performance and to do their duty. And I actually think on reflection you might find yourself in agreement with that, Councillor. But Councillor Grant is next.
Sorry to keep dragging this out then, because I do have concerns similar to Councillor Knowles on the fact that we have a whole lot of nothing as far as our knowledge base goes with any of the information that we have. I mean, you know, without clarity, it's not possible to understand municipal impacts or costs associated with this legislation. Now, I don't really see anything in what we've written for this proposal that gets the province to actually talk to us a bit more about the downloaded costs.
You did that at the last meeting.
Okay, all right, very good.
All right. I sense we're going in circles. Maybe we'll just call a vote.
Well, I was just going to say, I saw Doug Carr had his hand up a little while ago. I don't know if he, oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Close got her hand up. I was wondering if she had anything to add.
Commissioner, you want a piece of this?
The resolution that you passed last on February the 15th was that the province of Ontario be requested to satisfy the financial and social framework, location and enforcement questions prior to choosing a retail location in Oakville. So that hit on the four, the financial,
Yes.
social, location, and enforcement.
So we passed that at last
Yes.
meeting?
Yes.
Now, just to help
Okay.
you, it wasn't 3 minutes ago that Councillor Adams read that out and reminded us that we'd done that, so
But
that's,
she said it more authoritatively.
all righty then. Are we getting to the point where we can call a vote?
Okay, I'll support it on that basis.
All right, let's have a recorded vote. All those in favor of this resolution, please rise to be named. That would be Councillor Lischina, Councillor Adams, Councillor Grant, Councillor Knoll, Councillor Lapworth, Councillor Elgar, Councillor Hutchins, Councillor Giddings, Councillor Chisholm, Councillor Duddick, Councillor Robinson, and Councillor O'Meara, and Mayor Burton. I declare the resolution carried. Thank you, everybody. I wonder if we could get a motion on the Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee. Councillor Duddick, congratulations on getting your hand up first. As printed in your agenda, all those in favor, raise them high. That's carried. Thank you. 15, the receipt of the minutes of the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee. A hand to, Councillor Hutchins moves. All those in favor, raise them high. That's carried. Thank you. Now, I would like to solicit a motion to rise and report to council. Councillor Lapworth, all in favor? And that's carried. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, 3, and 4, confidential consent items C1 and C2, public hearing items 5, 6, 7, and 9, discussion items 8, 10, 11, 12, and 13, and advisory committee minutes items 14 and 15. May I please have a, let's see now, we rose and report, so now I need a mover and seconder for my report. I did, I said C2 right there. So Councillor Lischina and Councillor Robinson, all those in favor, and the report is adopted. A mover and seconder for the bylaws, please. Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Hutchins, all those in favor? And the bylaws as printed and noted by the clerk, including the revision to 45, are carried. Council, thank you for your time and attention and your diligence tonight. It's been great working with you. Our work is done for tonight, and we're adjourned.